Welcome to Dark Horror Diaries, my friend. Before the show starts, do write below where are you from. Let's go. I remember the first time we saw the house. It had that weathered, grandiose look. Almost too much so, as if it was trying too hard to impress. We had been searching for something affordable, a place to call our own after years of renting. When we walked through the door, something inside me clicked. This is it, I told my wife Anna, before she could even speak. She was a little more skeptical, but I could see the hope in her eyes too. A fresh start. A new life. The house had stood there for decades, its stone facade barely touched by time. Its windows stared back at us like silent eyes, watching everything we did. But there was something comforting about it. Something familiar, like an old photograph you find at the back of a drawer. Still, as we moved in, it felt like we were trespassing in someone else's story. Anna had her hands full with the boxes, making sure our toddler, Lily, didn't break anything in the process. Lily was already curious about the place. She ran from room to room, her little shoes tapping against the wooden floors. It was her enthusiasm that pushed us through. I could see it in her face. The wide-eyed wonder. She didn't know yet that there was something off about this place. It didn't take long for the whispers to begin. Lily had always been a sensitive child, but this was different. "Mom, Dad," she said one night, her voice trembling, "there's someone talking to me." I laughed it off, just another story from her overactive imagination. She was prone to these things, telling us about invisible friends and mysterious shadows. But as the nights passed, the whispers grew louder. They came from the walls. Soft, indistinct murmurs that fluttered just beneath the surface of our awareness. At first, we thought it was the house settling, the wind, or maybe the pipes. But it wasn't. It felt too deliberate, too personal. My unease grew, though I kept it to myself. After all, I didn't want to fuel Lily's fears. Then, one night, it happened. Anna and I were in bed, the room still except for the distant hum of the house. And then, from the vent near the floor, I heard it. A voice low. My heart skipped a beat. I turned to Anna, but she was already staring at me. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her face pale in the moonlight. The next day, Anna and I tried to brush it off. We told ourselves it was just the house. Old houses creak and groan. But something gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, like the air was too thick with secrets. Lily didn't help matters. She kept talking about the voices, but now she wasn't just hearing them. She was responding. "I told them I didn't want to play anymore," she said, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. "They won't stop asking me to come with them." Her little hands were trembling, her face pale with the weight of something unseen. Anna didn't know what to make of it, but she was visibly unnerved. I, on the other hand, tried to stay rational. I spent the next few days investigating, thinking it was something structural. Mice, maybe, or the wind causing vibrations. I didn't want to admit it, but deep down, I feared there was more to this place than met the eye. So, when Lily went to bed one evening, I decided to check the vents. I started with the one closest to the stairs. It was an old metal grate, rusted around the edges. The air that came through it was stale, thick with the smell of mildew, as if the house hadn't been properly ventilated in years. I moved down the hallway to check the others. The further I went, the more I felt like I was being watched. It was a creeping sensation, like cold fingers brushing against the back of my neck, and the whispers. They seemed closer now, like they were coming from behind the walls themselves. Finally, at the far end of the hallway, I found something unusual. A small door, nearly hidden behind layers of peeling wallpaper. It was so out of place. Too small for a closet, too tucked away to be an attic access. I hesitated, then pushed it open. Inside, there was nothing at first, just dark space. But when I shone my flashlight into the corner, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A narrow, spiraling staircase leading down into the basement. My heart thudded in my chest. "Anna," I called out. But my voice faltered as I reached for the light switch. The air around me felt denser, heavier, like the walls were closing in. I couldn't explain why, but I felt drawn to that basement, to whatever lay below. But I knew I couldn't go down alone. Anna stood in the doorway, her face pale. "We need to call someone," she said, her voice shaking. But I didn't want to call anyone. Not yet. Something in me, something primal, urged me to go deeper, to understand. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Anna. We lay in bed, both pretending the other was asleep, both listening to the house breathe around us. The whispers were gone, but the silence felt heavier than before, as if something was waiting. Around 3 in the morning, I finally sat up. I couldn't ignore it anymore. That staircase, the hidden one, I had to know where it led. I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could, but Anna stirred. "Don't," she whispered, her voice laced with something more than fear. "Just leave it alone." But I couldn't. I needed to know. I kissed her forehead and told her to go back to sleep, though we both knew she wouldn't. Down the hall, the little door stood open, waiting for me. I hesitated before stepping inside, the air cooler down here, thick with the scent of damp wood and something metallic. My flashlight cast long shadows along the walls as I descended. The steps creaked under my weight, but they held. The further I went, the more it felt like the house was swallowing me whole. At the bottom, the space opened into a room. A bunker of sorts, lined with shelves covered in dust. My breath caught as my light landed on an old, wooden table in the center. Scattered across its surface were brittle pages, a cracked leather journal, and something else. A row of photographs. Dozens of them. All black and white. All of people who were gone. My stomach twisted as I picked up the journal. The first page was covered in careful, slanted handwriting. I watch. I wait. I hunt. I nearly dropped the book. The words sent a shiver through me, colder than the damp air down here. My fingers trembled as I flipped through the pages, reading about a man who had once lived in this house. Or beneath it. He wrote about watching families, learning their routines, listening through the vents. Then my light flickered. I heard something. A shift in the air. Footsteps. No, something softer. A breath. I turned sharply, heart pounding. The space behind me was empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Then, from somewhere above, I heard Lily scream. I ran. I didn't think, didn't breathe. Just sprinted up the narrow staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time. My pulse roared in my ears. Lily's scream had already faded, but the house felt different now, like the air had been sucked out of it. When I reached the hallway, I nearly slammed into Anna, who was already running toward Lily's room. We burst through the door together. Lily sat up in bed, her tiny frame trembling, her breath coming in gasps. "He was here," she whimpered. "He was watching me." Anna rushed to her, wrapping her arms around our daughter. I stood frozen in the doorway, my mind racing. He? My fingers were still coated in the dust from that basement, the images from the journal seared into my brain. Watching, waiting, hunting. I stepped further into the room, scanning every shadow, every corner. The closet door stood slightly ajar. I swallowed hard and reached for the knob, bracing myself as I yanked it open. Nothing. Just clothes and a few scattered toys. But the air inside was colder, and a familiar scent drifted out. Damp wood and something metallic. My stomach clenched. "Lily," I said as calmly as I could. "What did you see?" She sniffled against Anna's shoulder. "A man," she whispered, "in the walls." The words sent ice down my spine. I exchanged a look with Anna, her face pale in the dim light. She knew. I knew. The whispers weren't just in our heads. Someone had been watching us, listening to us, from inside our own home. I didn't think. I acted. I stormed down the hall, past the little door leading to the basement, past the vents lining the walls. My hands were shaking, my breath ragged. I grabbed a crowbar from the hallway closet and pressed my ear to the wall where Lily's bed sat against. Silence, but I knew better. With a deep breath, I swung. The drywall cracked, crumbled under the force. I hit it again and again, until I tore a hole wide enough to see inside. A tunnel, dark and narrow, stretching further than I could see. And then, movement. A shuffling sound. A breath. There was someone inside the walls. I stumbled back, gripping the crowbar so tight my knuckles ached. The tunnel gaped before me, its darkness pulsing like a living thing. Anna was behind me now, clutching Lily to her chest. "What is that?" she whispered. I swallowed hard. "A passage," I said, though the word felt too simple, too clean for what I was looking at. The tunnel was tight, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. The air that leaked out was thick with decay, with something old and rotting. And then, I saw it, a handprint smeared against the wood. Not dust, not dirt, something darker. A noise, a rustling deeper inside. Someone was in there. Someone had been in there all along. Anna's breath hitched. "We have to get out, now." But I wasn't thinking about running. Not yet. I was thinking about the journal, about the words I'd read in the basement. I watch. I wait. I hunt. I was thinking about the missing person's photographs, about Lily hearing whispers, about the cold breath I'd felt on the back of my neck in the basement. And then the vent next to me shifted, just slightly. The realization struck me like ice water. He wasn't just in the walls, he was moving through them. A loud crash erupted from the other end of the house. A door slamming, no, a window shattering. Anna gasped, clutching Lily tighter. "He's trying to get out," I breathed. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to stop him or let him run. But then I remembered the journal. The photographs. This wasn't just someone hiding. This was someone hunting. I tightened my grip on the crowbar and took a step toward the tunnel. Something inside moved. And then, a face appeared. Pale, stretched thin over sharp bones. Eyes wide, dark, hollow. Lips barely parted, whispering something I couldn't understand. And then, he lunged. I barely had time to react. The thing, the man, shot out of the tunnel with unnatural speed, his body wiry and starved, his face a grotesque mask of hunger and madness. I swung the crowbar without thinking. It connected with a sickening crack, and he stumbled back, his breath wheezing from his throat. But he didn't fall, he just smiled. Anna screamed. Lily clung to her, her tiny hands fisting Anna's shirt as they backed toward the door. "Run," I shouted, but my voice barely sounded like my own. My heart was a hammer in my chest, my body moving on instinct as the man lunged again. I swung again, but this time he was faster. He ducked, his bony fingers scraping across my arm as he shoved past me, bolting down the hallway. I spun, adrenaline surging as I chased after him. He wasn't running for the front door. He was going back, to the vents, to the tunnels, to the spaces where he had lived, where he had watched. I couldn't let him disappear again. He reached the vent at the end of the hall, fingers clawing at the grate. I didn't hesitate. With everything I had, I drove the crowbar into his back. A horrible, wet gasp tore from his throat as he crumpled forward, his body half inside the vent. His limbs twitched, fingers flexing like a dying spider. Anna was suddenly beside me, phone in her shaking hands. I called the police," she stammered. "They're coming." The man made a sound, a wheezing, choked laugh. His head turned just slightly, dark eyes flicking up to meet mine. "There are more," he whispered. My blood went cold. Footsteps pounded outside. Flashing lights washed through the windows. I could hear voices, shouting, movement. The police swarmed the house, pulling me back, pulling him out. His frail, ruined body slumped as they dragged him away. But that whisper, that warning, it stayed with me. They found his lair beneath the basement. Dozens of items. Fragments of lives stolen, people who had vanished without a trace. And journals, so many journals. He had been here for years, watching, waiting, hunting. I came home today, and someone else has been in my house messing with things. A little over 2 weeks ago, my girlfriend, our 2 dogs and cats, and I had all moved into a new construction home. It was on a short street with about 12-13 plots, all for new homes being built in the area as part of some new construction group's test run. Because of this, the homes were lavish, at least to our standards, and cheaper than most other homes of half the quality. At first the price shocked us, but given that we'd been crammed into a 2-bedroom, 900-square-foot home with all 4 animals and ourselves with next to no storage space, we were willing to take a plunge and move out to just about anywhere. The new home was about 1,800 square foot, had 3 bedrooms and a bonus room, a backyard big enough for the pups to run around in and enjoy, and most importantly, no neighbors, at least not yet, which meant things would be quiet. Our last house had been about 2 miles away from the airport and highway, which meant any time of the day we were hearing planes landing and taking off, and 60-mile-an-hour traffic. Our dogs liked to bark at just about anything, including their shadows, and now the only thing we had to worry about was builders in the lots next to ours for the next couple months to finish the new homes. And that was a given when we moved in, and something we could handle considering the cost of the home. The builder met with us personally, laid out his construction plan, and assured us the other homes would fill the remaining plots in the next 4 or 5 months. And since we'd have to deal with the racket, he'd personally cover our HOA fees, make sure his landscapers kept our lawn trimmed, and even gave us the first installation package of a new home security system that just hit the market. I was thrilled about the home security, in large part of past issues I've had with several different break-ins. I wasn't taking any chances, and so I made sure I was an expert on the system by the time the realtor left the keys with us on day 1. It had one of those robotic voices, you know, where it announces, "Front door open," or "Garage door open." I think you get the picture. A small price to pay for knowing which entry and exit point was being used at any point in time. Of course, like any home security system, the actual alarm that went off was louder than most school fire alarms. I was impressed, really. The first few times my girlfriend came home, she'd forgotten that it was set, and the police stopped by more than once to have a laugh with us about it. They understood the whole new construction thing, new house, new bells and whistles, etc. To top everything off, I could access the alarm system from an app on my phone, which made me even more secure, knowing that if we ever left the house and animals unguarded and weren't sure if we'd plugged in the alarm code, I could easily access it from anywhere and make sure things were secure. Here's where things get interesting though. The company behind the alarm system, they were called Zentek Security. I hadn't thought of it at first, but aside from the small wire flag in the corner or the front yard and an emblem of ZTS, I couldn't find any actual reference online to them. I searched for a website, a phone number, anything to help in case I ever forgot how to use a certain feature on the system or had to reset the code and couldn't figure it out myself. I got a hold of the home builder one day on my way out the door, and he just said that they were relatively unknown still, and so they were still getting everything set up, a web base, direct line, etc. He said they were local and gave me an address if I ever wanted to go down there, but being on the verge of a final at work for being late, I stuffed the address in my pocket and forgot about it. Anywho, moving on to today, and this is where the weird shit started happening. I worked early because of overtime, and so I left the house around 8:30 a.m. when I usually work the swing shift and don't start until 11 a.m. My girlfriend usually has class on Wednesdays from 1 p.m. 4:30 and then works a few hours at her college's student union building. She gets home around 7:30, and usually we run into each other since it's the same time I'm usually off work. Tonight, though, I beat her home, and she had worse luck with traffic coming from the opposite side of town. Walking into the new house, I immediately noticed something was off. The dogs hadn't bombarded me through the door like they usually do when we walk in. Instead, I peered from the entryway through the kitchen to the back door and noticed them running around in the backyard. First off, the dogs can't be left outside all day while we're gone because they bark at anything including their shadow. We hadn't wanted to leave them out to annoy the builders during the day, so we'd been keeping them inside. Secondly, the blinds to the back door were open, and I always have them closed for privacy, and that went for any blinds in the house. Even living in a new home, my girlfriend's still home for part of the days, and I don't need any sweaty builders looking to take a break and play Peeping Tom while my girlfriend roams the house. The last thing that was off, and something I hadn't noticed until I'd taken a few steps into the house, was that the floor vents, at least the one right inside the front door entryway, and in the living room next to the fireplace, were flipped open. The new house had hardwood floors, and so any air coming out of the vents made for quite an eerie sound. A few more steps inside, and the cats came blasting out of the master bedroom. We'd made it clear when we moved in that the cats weren't allowed in there when no one was home because they were still figuring out the new space. and we didn't want them shitting under our bed. My girlfriend was always good about keeping them out when she left for class, and I was never here during the day unless it was Thursday or Friday for my days off. I closed the front door behind me to keep the cats from getting out, and took a quick peek around the house. Call me paranoid, but I even checked the crawl space, the trash cans in the garage, and underneath the countertops to see if someone was by chance stowed away inside my house. Then it dawned on me, the alarm system hadn't gone off when I came inside. No front door open, no garage door open, and no small chime to remind me to plug in the code and disarm it. I walked back to the entryway where the alarm panel was and woke the touch display. The system read, "Armed silent delayed error, call admin." I pressed a few more buttons trying to navigate away from the error, but nothing on the screen was responding. Just then, my girlfriend came through the door and the alarm went blaring off. Full volume, and no matter what I pressed on the alarm panel, it wouldn't shut off. The dogs started barking, the cats went crazy and started hissing at the dogs, and my girlfriend and I had our hands covering our ears. Not thinking straight enough thanks to the piercing noise, I bashed my fist against the screen. The noise continued, but the display shut off. My girlfriend motioned to the garage and went out to flip the breakers. The noise finally stopped a few moments later, but now we had a house without power. We flipped the breakers back over to give the house power, but the alarm came back on. It's been a couple hours now, and it's well past 9 p.m. We can't get a hold of the builder to ask him about the alarm system, and the crumpled up address in my pocket has bled and smeared on the paper he wrote it on. We're currently sitting upstairs in our bonus room with a few candles, the pups and the cats, and I just finished sharing everything that happened and what I saw when I first came home, and needless to say, my girlfriend and I are a bit spooked. Thankfully, the one box we have with candles was throw up here since we haven't finished unpacking the miscellaneous shit, and the bonus room has a balcony for me to smoke from. My apologies for any spelling mistakes or grammar, as I've written most of this from my iPhone and chain smoking cigarettes. As ridiculous as it sounds, we're both a bit too antsy to go downstairs and continue checking things out, and I have a gut feeling we shouldn't leave the bonus room. I'll update tomorrow as soon we get a hold of the builder, and hopefully we get things sorted out with the alarm system and weird shit stops happening. One last thing though, and if anyone else can maybe shed some light on this as homeowners too, there's a section of the ceiling in the bonus room that can be lifted up to go into the attic area of the house. Are they supposed to be locked? We had one in our home before, and to my knowledge there shouldn't be a lock on them. I just noticed too that there looks to be a few paint shavings and bits of insulation on the ground beneath it where my girlfriend and I have been sitting, so I know it's been opened before, but there's no way to open it now. We haven't spent a whole lot of time up here since moving in, so maybe the paint chips and insulation have been here all along. Maybe the attic's blocked from the inside by a piece of wood that was cut too long in the frame of the house. I'm just throwing out ideas to make myself feel better, I guess. If anyone has better ideas, outside of destroying the ceiling to my house so I can get it open to find out, I'm up for suggestions. Update. My girlfriend and I managed to nut up and go downstairs, let the dogs out to piss, and search things pretty well through with a couple flashlights we had stuffed in our junk drawer. Nothing else seemed out of place aside from the few things I listed above, and she assured me that she had left the blinds closed and the bedroom locked up when she left for class earlier in the day. We secured all the doors and windows, made sure everything was locked up, and moved ourselves to the master bedroom, dogs, cats, all of us. We lit some more candles and made sure we even kept a chair against the bedroom door and managed to get some sleep. Aside from the cats playing around all night and knocking some shit off the dresser, the night was relatively normal. Woke up this morning to the dogs barking and the sound of construction next door, and so I got dressed and scoped around outside to find the builder. I saw his truck down the road in front of one of the empty plots, and this was around 8 a.m. He was sitting in the front seat, talking on his phone and yelling at someone, maybe an ex-wife or girlfriend. I only say that because I heard something along the lines of, "You can't keep me from seeing them," a few derogatory terms, and finally it ended with, "I don't have the child support." That's when he saw me approaching his truck. He quickly changed his tone and greeted me, and I went into what happened with the alarm, not having power all night and wanting to get in touch with the alarm company. He came over, flipped our breakers, and all our lights came back on, but no alarm. He opened the front door, and sure as shit, front door open. I asked him to write down the company's address again, and this time I made sure to copy it onto my phone so I wouldn't have to worry about losing it. I didn't mention anything else. I thought that info was better kept to ourselves until we had some more information, and I really wasn't interested in having him in our house any longer than necessary. I just kept getting a bad vibe. My girlfriend still had class today, so I was left with the animals and my thoughts to keep my company, so I made a call to have the locks changed, but they can't come by until later this evening. I scoped the address on Google Maps and found an empty plot of land. Fancy that, right? Just a vacant block, right between two businesses on the other side of town, and on the street view, I could see a sign that even read, "For lease call XXX." At this point, I don't have a whole lot else to go on, so I'm making a trip to Home Depot to invest in some better tools. So hopefully get the attic access opened up, and see if maybe anything is up there, or at least any trace of someone recently being there. I'll keep you guys updated as soon as I have more to go off of. And thanks for the advice so far. May 29th. I ended up going to Home Depot and talking to a few employees about doing some home improvements. I mentioned how I needed to knock out some drywall to make an extension to a bedroom, and needed the appropriate equipment to repair the wall afterwards. They showed me a few things, and ultimately I realized that this sort of thing was outside my budget. I settled with getting a mallet, a drill and some drill bits, and even some door and chain locks. I figured if I couldn't at least get the attic access open, I could secure the shit out of it and any other doors in the house without locks. I also managed to get a stud finder. For some reason it sounded like a good idea. On my way home, I drove past the address my builder had given me for Zentech, and lo and behold, an empty lot like Google Maps had shown me. Nothing out of the ordinary. In fact, it was so ordinary that I decided to get out of my car and take a look. I parked at the business next door, it was one of those title loans places, and started scoping out the dirt. After a few minutes of finding a whole lot of nothing, I came across another fire flag with ZTS on it. This was about as far as Zentech had let me come, so I'm still pretty dry on any information there. If you guys can do some research and find anything, I'd appreciate any tips or direction of where to take it now. I headed back to my car, and just before I left I noticed the title loans business had the same wire flag outside. I walked inside, glass window between you and the receptionist. She pressed a button and spoke through the small speaker on the wall, and asked how I was doing. I mentioned Zentech, and her face drained of color. It was as if she knew something, but wasn't allowed to say. She followed up with, "I don't know anything about the system, I just cover the day shifts. The night guys who close up no more." I considered it, and maybe I'd go back later in the evening. I made it home around lunchtime and wasn't expecting to see my girlfriend. She had mentioned earlier before I left that she would be out early for class for an early lecture. I pulled into the driveway, curious that she was still home, and came inside with my tools, and she was sitting at the kitchen table, bawling her eyes out. Her cousin had passed away this morning, and she found out about it before leaving for class, car accident of some sort. She was a mess. Her cousin was her best friend, she grew up with her, they were close, and when we moved down here they lost touch for the sake of school and our lives just getting generally busier. She had made plans to fly out this afternoon to be with her family, and wanted me to come, but I couldn't get off work for the next few days, so this wasn't an option. I'd stay here, take care of the animals, and I promised to have this entire situation figured out with the house, the alarm, etc. I helped her pack some things, consoled her as much as I could, and ended up driving her to the airport around 2:33 p.m. She flew out at 4, and once I knew she made it safely onto the plane, she turned off her phone. It was only an hour and a half flight, so I made my way home. When I pulled up, something seemed off. I looked up to the balcony above the driveway, and the blinds were open. I mentioned in my first post that I keep all the blinds closed for privacy's sake when my girlfriend's at the house alone during the day. They're only open when we're home, and we hadn't been up to the bonus room and messed with the blinds since last night. We definitely hadn't opened them all the way. I got out of my car, nearly sprinted to the front door, and as soon as I got my key in the locking mechanism, the alarm went off. What the F? I came inside, tapped on the display, and was able to put in our alarm code and shut the thing off. The dogs were back in the backyard again, and the bedroom door was open. I know I'd personally closed it once we finished packing, and then I noticed my tools weren't on the table where I'd left them. Instead, they were scattered across the floor, and the chain locks were missing. Jesus cursed, what else had been tampered with? I ran upstairs, checked the bonus room, and sure as shit, there were more paint chips and a noticeable amount of insulation pieces on the ground. Someone had been inside my house again. I dialed 911, and within 15 minutes, a cruiser showed up. It was one of the regular guys who had come by because of a few alarm hiccups, and I explained everything to him. I told him everything down to the floor vents, the blinds, and coming home to my dogs being locked outside, the attic access, and he agreed to take a look at things. He couldn't do much, but we did manage to get the attic opened up. I used the mallet I'd bought earlier, and he was able to crawl up there and take a look. It took him a few minutes, but he peeked out over the edge of the hole in the ceiling and dropped down the chain locks. He gave me one of those, "Are you serious? You had me crawl up here for this," looks. He wasn't amused, and I was dumbfounded. There isn't a way that's explainable in my mind that those locks, the locks that still had the barcodes on them from the store, could have ended up in the attic between the time I left to take my girlfriend to the airport and came home. Not unless someone had forced entry into my home. I finally convinced the officer to have CSI come out and at least wipe a few things down for prints, but after talking to them, they could assure me of a couple things. This was new construction, and there's going to be a lot of prints from the builders, electricians, and anyone else who helped set up and build the home. Whatever they found wouldn't be discovered in an hour-long time stamp like the TV show, and I'd be waiting at least a couple days for the results. This was as close as I was going to get to finding some answers, and I wasn't willing to risk my privacy any longer. Someone's been watching my home, watching when we leave and when we're not paying attention. Someone, whether it be the builder or his crew, or this Zentech place, someone's been in here, and I intend on figuring out who. I managed to install the new locks on the front and back doors along with the chains. I had a locksmith come over and change all the primary locks to the house, including 2 separate keys for the deadbolt and the standard lock on both the front and back door. I locked the garage door manually and pulled the plug on the box on the ceiling so no power at all was coming to it, and I waited. I waited and ended up passing out in the living room and didn't wake up until one of the cats had come and hopped up onto my lap. I looked at my phone, and it was almost 7:30 p.m. No missed calls from my girlfriend, and this worried me. I'd called her 2-3 times and kept getting her voicemail. I assumed it just died on the plane or closed after she landed, and she's just with her family and not concerned about her cell right now. No worries there. May 30th. I woke up today, and still no missed calls from my girlfriend for me to even know if she landed safely or not and got to her family. I checked everything out, and the house looks normal, no interference from anyone other than me, and the animals kept quiet all night, which is strange. I can hear the builders next door working, but I can't help but feel like they're keeping one eye on my house at all times. Just the way they're walking, they seem like they're purposely trying to someone face my direction. I can see them through the bedroom window, and also from the balcony. I thought I smelled something weird, and so I spent the first hour this morning undoing every vent I could find, both floor vents, wall vents, and even the ones on the ceiling. I couldn't find a source for the smell, so maybe I'm just finally letting the paranoia get to me. I'll see how today goes, and update when I have anything more. But I have a good feeling that if I leave today, for even an hour, there's going to be something off when I come home. Something always is. I've closed all the blinds, locked all the windows and the doors. Both front and back have new locks. The garage isn't opening for anything. The dogs are inside, cats are out of the master bedroom. I can't think of anything else to try. I've locked the chain on the back door, but it's kind of hard with the front, so we'll see how that goes. I'm going to go get a hold of my brother. He's about a 45-minute drive away, and see if he wants to do something today. Maybe he'll come down and help me sort some of this out. I'm open for suggestions, guys, so please leave me anything you can think of. May 30th, 31. So yesterday, I ended up getting a hold of my brother, and he came over so I didn't have to leave and risk anything else happening. Luckily, he doesn't even live an hour away, and he was in the area. As soon as he got here, we sat down and I explained everything that had been happening, and since he's worked construction in the past, he ended up agreeing with a lot of the things you guys have mentioned in the comments. False walls, how easy it would be for builders to include hidden entry points to homes, knowing the layout even better than I do, etc. I'll just jump right into things. First thing, I showed him the entire floor plan, walked him through every room, showed him every space and crevice, all the vents, etc. Since he's built homes and done all sorts of construction before, he had a much better idea on what to look for than I did. He checked the doors and windows for any sign of forced entry, especially with the windows, any hint that someone had maybe crawled through them, and left any trace on the outside, and opened up every vent and made sure there wasn't any source to that smell I have mentioned. He couldn't find anything obvious, but he wasn't satisfied with giving up. He wanted to talk to the builder, but before we did, I showed him the alarm system and how it worked. It had been disabled since the police had come over the day before, and so there wasn't a chance of it going off again unwanted. This is where he didn't have much expertise. He wasn't sure on anything when it came to the system, but we agreed to keep things turned off until we had a better idea about everything else. He wanted to talk to the builder, and so I made sure everything was locked up. Doors were closed, dogs were inside, and cats kept out of the bedroom, windows closed and locked, etc. This was before someone mentioned keeping a log of things. We came outside. I made sure to lock the door behind us, and we walked down the road to where the builder's truck was. I came-uped to him, and immediately he asked why the police were over the day before, and if everything was okay. I played it off as another alarm malfunction, and that it wasn't anything. He seemed more curious than he needed to be though. My brother started in on conversation, trying to reel him in with talk about mutual employment, how he's done construction and home building, and they got off track for a moment before I realized what my brother was doing. I just sort of stood there, not knowing dick about building houses, and trailed off. I lit up a cigarette and just hung around for a minute when my phone went off. It was my girlfriend. She'd lost her phone after getting off the plane, and she'd been with her family since the airport. It wasn't a huge deal. I was just glad she was okay, and in the background I could hear her mom and sister talking over her. She was fine, that's all I needed to know. I walked back down the street, gave her a quick summary of what had been going on since she left, and assured her not to worry, that my brother had come over and I was going to convince him to stay through the weekend to help us sort things out. She had a sigh of relief, knowing I wasn't alone to do all of this, and I suggested she stayed with family a few extra days for everything going on, and that I'd have this all resolved so she wouldn't have to come home to more stress. Given the situation, she agreed after a few minutes of convincing, and I let her get back to her family. When I finished up on the phone, my brother had come up to me and just motioned for us to go. We'd only been outside for maybe 10 minutes, but he was serious about something. We walked back to the house. I put the key in the locking mechanism, and as soon as I opened the door, the alarm system started blaring again. I ran up to the panel, plugged in the code, but it wasn't shutting off. The noise kept screaming through my house. The dogs started barking bloody murder, and finally, my brother pulled out his keys and wedged it between the system panel and the wall and popped it right off. The noise stopped. The ringing in my ears kept going for a few minutes, but when it ceased, he looked me in the face and said we needed to leave, get some lunch, just get out of the house for a little bit. I knew not to argue with him when he had a certain look on his face, and this was the look. We did a walkthrough of the house. Nothing seemed out of place this time, but he assured me something would be when we came home. I decided to keep the dogs outside, just since they were so riled up, and everything else was still locked. We got in his Jeep and left. We decided just to go about a mile or two away, and sat down at a diner by the name of Rocky's. Not important, but they have incredible onion rings. If you have one in your area, go. They'll settle your nerves better than any whiskey. We sat down, and he immediately brought up a few things. Did you get the universal keys for the in-house locks when you moved in? Did I even check? Have I personally been up in the attic access since getting it open to see if there was anything up there aside from insulation and the framing of the house? Have I been unusually congested late at night, either right before or any time after we moved into the house leading up to recently? Have I background checked anything about the guy who built my house? I didn't know about the universal and home keys for the locks inside. Me and my girlfriend's last house didn't have them, and we'd never been given them. I hadn't known where to check until my brother informed me that honest builders leave them on top of the door frames of any rooms with locks. I hadn't been in the attic myself at all. The officer who came by the other day has been the only person I've seen actually go up there, and that was when he dropped down the chain locks. I hadn't managed to go up there myself to see anything. I hadn't been congested or anything that I'd remembered, but my girlfriend had been complaining about feeling sick a few nights of the week since we moved in, and more times than not, she'd get up in the middle of the night and cough up phlegm, loogies, etc. before she'd be able to come back and get to sleep. She wasn't allergic to the animals or anything, and it was weird, but I hadn't thought much of it. I hadn't looked much into the builder either. In fact, I knew about as much about him as I do most strangers, aside from his name, and that he builds houses. My brother almost looked dumbfounded, like I'd done something wrong or bad. He was giving me that wounded puppy dog look. That's when he went into a few things that really scared me. He explained that the universal keys for the inside locks were just little pieces of thin metal with a flat edge. He went into a few horror stories from the past when he was building homes, and how he'd had a few squatters from a crew he worked with that disappeared when the homes finished being built. It ended up that they hid up in the attic access and robber the homeowners after they moved in. He mentioned how they basically made camp up there, and during the day when the owners would leave for work, they'd sneak down and steal things and leave through the back doors, and then hide up there again before anyone noticed. They'd use the bathrooms and even the shower during the day and wouldn't leave a trace. This went on for a couple weeks, and once they'd taken everything that the owners wouldn't notice up front, they snuck out without even being noticed. They bragged about it, it was sick, and he'd reported them to the authorities, but nothing came of it. They weren't able to prove it once things had happened. As far as the congestion, he'd already checked the vents, but wasn't entirely convinced that nothing was there, knowing that my girlfriend had the congestion. One other horror story he had was from one of the first construction jobs he'd done. The builder had laced some of the vents with a chemical, scentless, that made the homeowners sick, congested, you name it. It was a twisted joke, nothing meant to kill or seriously injure someone. But again, the compound was untraceable and scentless. He just heard the word from mouth, and suggested we double and triple check things to make sure. Lastly, he wanted to look into the builder, get a background check, and make sure he was up to snuff with now black marks to worry about. This stuff was already full of red flags, and he wanted to make sure we covered all our bases to get this situation taken care of. We were getting ready to finish up and leave when my phone went off. It was the alarm app. Someone was inside my house and had used the front door. It was locked. The system panel was off the wall. This was it. We had something. We practically jumped up from the table, bolted outside, jumped in the car, and we were back to my house within a couple minutes. We could hear the alarm going off from the driveway, and my dogs were barking in the backyard. The door was closed, locked even, and when we came inside, the panel was back on the wall. I plugged in the code, and it turned off. Things were escalating. I let my dogs in, found the cats huddled underneath the couch, and we came up with a plan. My girlfriend and I together had a few laptops and a desktop computer, and my brother suggested we enable all the webcams but put the screens to sleep. Leave one in the bedroom, one upstairs in the bonus room, another in the living room, and make sure they're always running, always recording, and to not turn them off until we had something. We managed to get into the attic access, but didn't see anything obvious for someone being up there. No wood piece sticking out to keep it firmly closed. Nothing that showed it had been previously barricaded, but between a couple of the wood panels, it had looked worn down like someone had been sitting between the two. Nothing else stood out, so my brother suggested I leave to close the panel, and we drill it shut, just like you guys had also suggested. After that, we were out of immediate ideas. I jumped on here to check some of your comments, looking for any more we could immediately implement, and we both started a log to keep track of when we used certain doors, when we closed them, opened them, timestamps for whenever we stepped outside to smoke, and we even ran through and checked each point regularly. We did another check on all the vents. We didn't find any cameras or fiber optic wires, nothing to suggest someone had been tampering with anything for the ventilation, but just to be safe, we turned off the air and even kept log of that. We made sure no settings on the panel were set to automatic, and made sure every vent stopped blowing air also. He showed me on the floor vents how if you reach in, you can fold a thin piece of metal opened or closed, and we closed all of them and added it to our logs. Those aren't going to be blown open by any air and had to manually be opened and closed. Everything was secure. The doors, windows, vents, attic access, the extra chain locks, everything. My brother had one last idea, and that was the universal keys for the indoor locks above the door frames. Usually, when the builders finish up homes, they're left above the frames of every door with a lock minus the front and back door, and usually the garage access. We grabbed a kitchen chair and checked above each door frame. I had the universal keys, but my brother told me not to touch them instead. We took a picture of each top of the frame and logged where each key was in case whoever was messing around inside when I was gone was using them. We'd be able to tell since I hadn't known about them until now and hadn't ever used them. A great idea. I was taking anything into consideration at this point. Any ideas were worth a shot. My brother ended up staying the night, crashing on the couch and pulling the alarm panel off the wall again for the evening. I slept in my bedroom and kept the door open since there was a straight shot to the living room and front door from where I laid. We woke up this morning and everything was normal. Nothing was out of the ordinary. The doors were all exactly how they'd been on our logs, and the same went for the keys on the door frames. I'm at work, and I've been typing this up for the last hour, but my brother agreed to stay over at the house and keep an eye on things, and he's periodically updating me on the logs as he goes. Sorry it took so long for the update, and I'll give you guys more when I have it. I'm still open for suggestions if you guys have them, so please feel free. I can't help but think that I'm still missing something, not checking something, and it's right under my nose. Help me out, guys. May 31st. So over the course of work yesterday, I took a lot of what you guys suggested into consideration. I ended up getting off late, around 8:30, and the sun was pretty much down. I walked inside, no alarm going off thankfully, and my brother was sitting on the couch playing on my iPad. He greeted me and said he had a few new ideas of his own for us to try tonight. And at first I was lost considering we'd be around the entire time and nothing's happened when we've been home. But he assured me it was worth investigating. The new houses being built along the street were still in the early stages. That meant there was open floor plans for anyone to walk into and check out, and no locked doors to stop us. I wasn't entirely sure where he was going with things, but given that he hadn't led me astray yet, I was all ears. I brought up a few ideas you guys listed in the comments, and he jumped over them, confident that we'd soon be at the end of all of this, but if not, we could look into them. My brother wanted to settle things tonight and get to the bottom of all of this. He told me to grab a flashlight, put on something dark to wear so no headlights would see us through the framing if a car drove by, and to lock everything up. I did as he asked, curious as hell as to what he was thinking. Instead of coming out of the front door, we left through the backyard. I had a gate, but we ended up jumping the fence and into where the backyard would be next door to the right. Currently, my house was the only one finished, and so everything else was just dirt, wood piles and spare tools, and the skeleton of homes being built. We crept through the framing, located what was going to be the bathrooms and bedrooms, kitchen, closest, etc. Eventually, my brother found what he'd been looking for. He motioned for me to come over to where he was crouching, over a flat panel of wood on the ground in what was the underspace of the stairs. My house had stairs also, and this was where my crawl space was. I'd done a quick look down there, and my brother had done another with me when he came down, but he had a certain look in his eyes. He lifted up the panel, and lo and behold, the crawl space was right there. We slipped down into it, down on all fours, and looked up at me and motioned for me to jump down also. I bit down on my flashlight and crawled over the edge right behind him. He flipped his light in the direction my house would be and started crawling that way. Eventually, we hit a wall. We felt around from one side to the other, patting down the black tarp that lined everything in the crawl space, and eventually my brother found something. There was a piece of tarp that when pressed against, didn't stop against the wall. My brother felt all around and found where the piece ended and shuffled it to the side and beneath him. There was a tunnel, only about 15-20 feet long by the looks of it, and in that moment, all of my fears came to life. I crawled in front of him, down the tunnel, and sure as shit, we popped up underneath my house and found the entrance to my crawl space. We'd finally done it. We'd figured out how they were getting inside undetected. We'd found the proof and along with it, and for a brief moment, I had a sigh of relief. My brother, on the other hand, looked terrified. He pressed his hands against the crawl space entrance, and it wouldn't budge. We both pressed against it. But even together, we couldn't get it to open or give even a little bit. We heard shuffling above, and I knew someone was in my house right now. They'd been waiting all day, just in case we left. They'd come up as soon as we locked the door and come into the backyard. I knew for a fact that nothing was above my crawl space, nothing to block our entrance. We scurried across the black tarp, back to the tunnel between the underbellies of the homes, and made our way back to the other side. It took us a few minutes, but we finally found the crawl space entrance to exit. Thankfully, it wasn't blocked like mine. We crawled back to the surface and were about to bolt back over to my home when my brother stopped me. He pulled me in close and whispered that we should wait. We should see if he comes back. I had a better idea in mind to cover his exit point and force him into my house with us there waiting. We quickly searched for something heavy to put on top of the plank, and after a moment, we found a pile of cinder blocks. We covered the wood plank with 7-8 of them, easily over 250-300 pounds worth, and then we headed back towards my house. Keys in hand, we run back to my house, and I couldn't unlock the door fast enough. Before we even opened the door, I could hear my dogs barking, but it wasn't because of the alarm. Whoever had been there still was. We scanned the room. I made sure to lock the door behind us when we came in, and we migrated from room to room until the only place left was upstairs. We heard rustling. It was coming from the bonus room. We crept up each stair one by one, and finally I heard a large thud as if someone had crashed into the door. They knew we were close. They knew they had no time to get back to the crawl space and get away. We opened the door right after the thud, and right before he left our field of vision, we saw the blur of someone in black, right as they cleared the balcony. I heard the sound of glass breaking. He'd used my car to break his fall. We ran to the railing, but he was gone. All we could hear was the faint sound shoes hitting cement as they got farther and farther away. We got a hold of the police, and not even 10 minutes later, a couple cruisers showed up. One of the officers was the usual who'd shown up a few times before, and tonight was his lucky night. We showed them the crawl space, the tunnel between my house and the one next door, gave as good of a description as we could of the guy who we almost caught, and they had CSI come back out to do a sweep of things for another round of prints. They did the railing, the doorknobs, as much as they could of the crawl spaces, and collected any evidence they could from my car and the impact. I told them about the alarm company Zentech, and they'd never once heard of them, but that didn't matter. There was some blood, and I was convinced we had this thing, and I'd finally be done with everything. I gave them all the information I had on the builder and his crew, gave them a rough profile for each based on everything I'd found out or caught onto since moving in. And they said they'd get back to me with everything they could. Through all of this, and not until the officers left for the night, I'd forgotten that the webcams had been running, one of which was in the bonus room. My brother and I sat down in front of the laptop and fast-forwarded to tonight, right around the time I'd gotten home, and when we left to check out the floor plan of the other house. This is where things got strange. We watched up until the point where the bonus room door opened and the man came inside. He never once made facial contact with a webcam, and we placed it conveniently where you'd have to in order to access the balcony door. That's when we noticed the balcony door swing open, but he wasn't alone. The intruder opened the door, and then came back in the direction of the webcam and the entrance to the bonus room, while the other vaulted off the balcony. We'd swept the entire house with the police. The attic access was closed off and drilled shut, and even the crawl space was empty. If one jumped off the balcony, then where was the other who'd stayed in the bonus room? At that moment, the color drained out of my brother's face. He got up from the computer and backed up towards the balcony. He stepped out, lit up a cigarette, and just stood there in the doorway, shaking. I came out, lit one up with him and asked him what was going on. He just looked at me and said, "False walls." At that point, I'm sure the color drained out of my face also. There had to be one, well hidden and easily accessed in the bonus room. There just had to be. We spent the better part of an hour scanning every square inch of the room, knocking on every square inch of the wall, the ceiling, the floor, even to see if there was anything short of a teleporter hidden up here. We couldn't find shit. Not a single thing, and it wasn't without putting a few holes in the wall to aid our search. We had nothing except an answer for how they were getting in and out. That, and the fear that whoever was here might still be. We can't be certain, but one thing we do know is that we're not staying in the house tonight. We can't trust it now that we've made progress in the right direction. We know their plan, we know how they were getting in, and now we feel even less safe than we did before. At least not knowing gave us the illusion of some protection. Now they've outsmarted us again, and with our luck the entire house is covered in hidden entrances and passages. I took one of your ideas and closed every door and put a piece of tape at the bottom of where they open and close. I even did it to the crawl space. We're gonna get out, stay at a friend's house tonight, and update the log of everything, doors closed, windows, all the tape we put out, and check back first thing in the morning. Thanks for the support and suggestions, guys. I feel like I'm one step closer to getting all of this resolved, but also one step further at the same time. June 1st. We just woke up, and it's about 8:30 a.m. I managed to get a hold of my girlfriend, and they're having the funeral today, so I won't be hearing from her until after. I have to head back to the house and grab a few things for work, and I'll post this when I get there. Any additional updates will come later tonight, and I'll throw an edit onto this post with any word of mouth we get from the police. Edit. Got home from work a bit late tonight, guys, so I apologize that the update had taken a few. Some of you wondered if I'd brought the dogs and cats with us last night after we left. We did, and we all managed to cram into a friend's house. It was temporary, so he didn't mind the minor inconvenience for an evening given everything that had happened. We got up early this morning, got back to my place to check on everything, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that all of the tape strips were still in place on all the doors and the crawl space. No alarm went off when we came in, and a small sense of normalcy washed over me with a sigh of relief. Aside from some glass in the driveway from the evening before, everything else looked to be in check. Nothing crazy, and most importantly, the logs from the evening before matched up. I got cleaned up, made sure to update the logs for every door my brother and I used, took the tape off the bathroom for my brother and the garage in case he went out to smoke, and we compiled a list of all the valuables I had in sight. My girlfriend and I actually had quite a bit of things that your usual robber or home intruder would probably swipe up in a heartbeat. Just from the things in plain sight, there was several game consoles, a PlayStation 4 and an Xbox One, about 100 games worth, an iPad and a Surface tablet, iPod Touch, the desktop computer and monitor, a pretty expensive stereo setup with surround sound, any jewelry she had left laying out in the bedroom or in the master bathroom, and the list in total ended up being around 25-30 of the most important, obvious items my brother and I could find laying around the house. This didn't include all of the jewelry my girlfriend had in her jewelry box, and miscellaneous things we had tucked in the closet, and quite a few other things that could have been listed. I knew my girlfriend was busy with the funeral for her cousin, and so I left the list with my brother and finished getting ready for work, made sure everything was in place and where it should be, and he told me he was good to go. I worked my shift, got off late like I had mentioned, and now I'm home and everything went as normal should go from what my brother told me. It's the weekend, so he hasn't seen any of the builders, so now we're just waiting for tomorrow morning to see if any of them show up. And if they do, we're coming up with a plan on how to handle things. For some reason, we're considering discreetness considering all the flashing red and blue lights last night. I did call the police station to see about what they'd found out about the webcam footage, but they're still going through all of it and said they should have something for me come tomorrow. Sorry for the less than exciting update, but I'll get something else posted tomorrow when I have more to share. Thanks for all the helpful tips and suggestions, guys. I took the flour and sugar idea into consideration, and I'm going to put it down in front of all the doorways my brother and I can spare before we run out. Front door, crawl space, back door and garage, bonus room, etc. And we're going to see if we can't catch anything tonight. Hopefully we get one step closer. Have a good night, guys, and I hope I can provide more in my next update. June 1st. Continued. Last night, my brother and I came up with an attack plan for what we were going to do if the builder and his crew showed up in the morning. What we hadn't anticipated was that they'd show up as early as they did. More on that later. Here's what happened following the short update from last night. Our idea was to confront the builder, ask about the crawl space, and hint that I'd heard a draft coming from underneath the house, and that I was wondering if there were any openings. We wanted to get him on the rocks and see about scaring him for a change. We were going to see how that went if he showed up, and then check out the loan business for any additional hints or clues towards Zentech. If all that went smoothly, we should have been a few steps closer and in the right direction, and then following up with the police was our next check on the list. We cracked open a few beers, bullshitted about some stories from our childhood, and got off topic of everything that's been happening as of late. It was a nice break from all this stress, to be honest, and I needed it. I managed to get a hold of my girlfriend, asked a stupid question on how the funeral went, and obviously, the answer was terrible. I mean, it wasn't a wedding reception, and I had so many other things on my mind that I'd let that one slip right out. She understood, especially after I caught her up on all the updates from the weekend away. She was scared and worried, but some progress had actually been made, and I assured her as much as I could that things were going to be okay. I managed to have her agree to stay with her mom and sister for a few more days, but she said she'd be coming home by Wednesday no matter what. My brother and I did another once-over to all the rooms, made sure we put new strips of tape on all the doors, and I had a bag of flour that we ended up pouring a thin layer of in front of all the main doors and entryways. We placed a storage chest over the crawl space entrance filled with various things my girlfriend and I had stored, and it weighed at least 100 pounds or so. The crawl space door wasn't opening without one of us noticing. One of the dogs slept with me in the bedroom, and the other one stayed out in the living room with my brother. That way, if something happened, we'd know from the only alarms working in the house. We shut off all the lights, double-checked the doors and windows one last time, and made sure not to step on any of the flower patches, and called it a night around 11:30 or so. June 2nd. I woke up a couple hours later to my dog growling at the end of my bed. I looked over to the nightstand, and it was just after 2 a.m. I did my best to wake up, and he kept growling and letting our subtle little woofs. I leaned over to my nightstand, flipped on my lamp, and the room illuminated, but nothing was out of the ordinary. My dog got off the bed and walked over to my bedroom door and laid in front of it. Light was peeking through from the living room, and I assumed my brother was just using the bathroom. I leaned down, tried to peek underneath, and saw the paws of my other pup walking around the living room. I got down on my stomach to try and get a better peek if possible, and saw front door cracked. I immediately opened up the bedroom door and rushed into the living room, and the scent of smoke came into my nostrils. I walked up to the door, the hardwood floor making a silent approach nearly impossible, and before I made it to the door, my brother came in. He'd stepped out for a smoke, and hadn't wanted to alarm me or the dogs and apologized if he woke me up. I sat down with him in the living room after we made sure the door had been locked, and that's when we heard footsteps upstairs. Both of us were dead silent, and the footsteps continued for at least 30 seconds before finally ceasing. The dogs had both been locked in position, woofing and showing little hints of, "Hey, someone's messing here." We listened as carefully as we could, and from what we could tell, they stopped in the spare room upstairs, right across from the bonus room. We let the dogs out in the backyard. They completely scattered all the flour in front of the door, and we closed it behind them. In the backyard, they started barking, and we made our way to the base of the stairs. We couldn't hear any more movement, but both of us knew we'd heard something. Step by step, we carefully made our way to the top before tunnering towards the spare room. The door was open, and we both knew that it had been closed before we went to bed. I slipped my hand inside the doorway and tapped the light switch on the wall. I got down, checked under the bed, looked on both sides, but there was nothing. That left the closet, which should have been full of all the spare towels, toiletries, blankets, and any extra shit we had for guests. The closet door was closed, but we weren't ruling anything out. We took a few steps towards the door and opened it. The light was off, and so we reached in, flipped it on, and there was no one there. We patted at the walls, pulled things off the sleeves, but nothing. Not a damn thing. We came back out into the upstairs hallway where the spare room, upstairs bathroom, and bonus room connected, and it dawned on me. The window. I walked back into the bedroom, and the window was unlocked. He'd walked right inside and jumped right out. My brother ran downstairs and took a flashlight with him. I had gravel and bark on the side of my house, and so if someone had jumped from the second story to the ground, we'd be able to tell from the ground. Sure as shit, there was a spot right below the window where the bark had been scattered. We locked the window and came back downstairs and tried to come up with how someone had gotten inside. My brother thought it happened when he was smoking. He told me he'd walked down the driveway and onto the sidewalk to do a little surveillance, but what he didn't realize is that was exactly what he and they were waiting for. A moment to slip in undetected. They'd gone upstairs between the time he'd gone outside, and I'd woken up from the dog. Damn it, we'd been so raped up in all of this that we'd made a small mistake, and they made it inside with little to no effort. ID thought the footprints in the flour were from my brother when he walked inside, but he'd been barefoot, and the marks were clearly those of boots or shoe soles. We cowed sleep. We weren't going to risk anything else, and so we stayed up for a few more hours and made a pot of coffee. Around 6 a.m. or so, we heard the sound of a couple vehicles pull up outside. It was a work van. It wasn't one that was usually around when the builders were, and shortly after that, the builder's truck pulled up too, followed by another truck. I called the police, told them that the construction crew was here right now, and they needed to get the F over here. My brother and I continued to watch from the window, but we didn't see the builder get out of the truck. Instead, it was someone else. I walked outside and demanded to know who he was. He told me he was the builder for the new construction homes, and that he'd been out of town on another site of his for the last 2 weeks, and that his crew was going to pick up where they'd left off. He wanted to get on site and check on everything, just to make sure they were on schedule to start work on the homes again. That sure as hell threw me for a spin, especially when he asked me when I moved in, who the realtor was who took care of things for me, and how the new house was. He said the realtor he usually works with had been out of town with him, and wondered if she'd set something up with a partner to get me moved in. Mine was the first one finished, the rough draft he called it for the rest that he was putting up, and he had barely finished having the place fumigated before he left. He apologized for any of the smell that may have still been lingering around the time of the move-in once I told him the exact date I'd gotten settled, and even showed general concern knowing that we'd moved in so soon after he'd done it when they don't let tenants back in until tea pesticides have successfully dissipated. At that point, I'm sure he was just as confused as I was. My brother came outside too, asked some of the same questions I did, and was rewarded with the same answers. This wasn't the builder. This wasn't the guy I'd been seeing the last couple weeks. And the guys getting out of the work van weren't the crew I'd reconginsed over the last couple weeks either. He had a dumb look on his face, like he thought I was joking, and then I asked to see some identification. He didn't even hesitate, and showed me his ID, and even pulled out his busness card. Same name, same company log for the housing company, same everything. I was at a loss. By 6:15 a.m., the police showed up. They spoke with the builder, filled him in on everything that had been going on, and I told him about the crew and guy who had been claiming I'd be the builder that had been around the last 2 weeks. We gave a description of him, everyone from the crew we could remember, and then the actual builder and police both asked me the same question. How much progress has been made on the houses since we moved in? How much had been made in the last several days that this has all been going on? They mapped out the work schedule, and how much progress should have been made in the last 2 weeks, and my brother agreed. The frames for at least 2 or 3 of the houses should have been put together, and there should have been insulation in them. Wiring progress should have been started, and even plumbing should have made some headway. The builder said he barely noticed a difference in how things looked when he left to right now. He wouldn't have noticed a thing if I'd not mentioned it and come up to him at 6 asking who he was. The last thing I asked about was Zentech. He hadn't heard of them, and had no intentions on loading every house with a security system. They were spendy, and not in his budget for this project. It had been an idea early on in the first stages of the project, but never panned out. He had included the utilities panel inside the homes in case anyone wanted to have their own set up, but that's as far as he'd gone. The police hadn't come up with any leads on Zentech either, and after I invited the builder inside to check things out, he noticed a few things that didn't add up considering he'd built the house himself. The alarm system panel was right over the wall plate where he'd put a utility panel. He pulled the entire panel off the wall, and inside there should have been several dead connections where a system could have been set up, and my house already had one. There were connections linking to several areas in my house, and after asking how long it would have taken to wire an entire system, his answer wasn't one I was looking forward to. 4 or 5 guys who knew what they were doing could wire an entire system in a few hours if they hurried. They wouldn't need to tear apart the walls or even do a lot of work to install everything. The police had an actual alarm company come out that morning and checked my entire home. They found 10 cameras hidden, and they were hidden expertly. 2 of them were in the living room, one in the light fixture and ceiling fan, and another in the fire alarm above the entryway. 2 more were in the kitchen, wired into the display window of the microwave, and another in the display window for the stove. We found another wired into the garage box, right on the ceiling, and that was only 5. It took a couple more hours, but eventually we found the others. In the 3 bedrooms and bonus room, there had been one inside the light fixture for each room, and the last one was the worst. It was in the master bathroom behind the mirror. I asked how something like this could have happened and so fast, and unfortunately, their answer wasn't easy to swallow. Everything's wireless now. All you need is a base connection, and everything links together like a remote control to a television. I didn't care. I just wanted all of them removed and taken care of. I asked the builder if he'd found anything else in the house that didn't match his original plans, and he only found one more thing. The bonus room upstairs. There had been an exposed piece of walling that was ruined during the final days of finishing things up. He'd left things in the hands of his crew to take care of it, and when I showed him the closet upstairs, he showed me exactly where the wall had broken. He went down to his truck and came back up with a hand drill and a few different drill bits. He drilled a small hole in the wall on the opposite side of the bedroom and showed me how thick it was. Then we drilled a hole in the closet wall. It was thinner, much thinner. You wouldn't be able to tell by looking at it, and it was still sturdy enough to lean on and withstand some pressure. He felt around for some grooves, any space to grab onto, and right where the shelving inside the closet met the edge of the wall, there was a small crease that could be pulled back with a small, flat edge. The builder pulled a flat-head screwdriver out of his utility belt and moved it between the wall and the shelving. It came open with little to no give, and the creases where it broke from the wall were completely unharmed. It was perfectly in place and only open from the one side. The space was the size of the underspace beneath a kitchen sink. You or I could have uncomfortably squeezed in there and had enough room to still close the wall behind us. It was the perfect little cubby. The perfect hiding spot for someone who needed to quickly get out of sight. Nothing else stood out at the builder, aside from the crawl space tunnel, and that's being filled up today. The police had checked for prints all over the false wall space, the wiring and cameras for any prints or partials, and the alarm company did one final run-through and checked every space they could for anything extra hiding out of sight, and to see if they could find any digital footprints. I called into work, got the day off considering everything coming to head, and now I'm just sort of at a loss for what to do next or how to continue. The police are going to check on the footage from my webcams and see if anything leads to finding these guys, and we're also going to check out the loan business where Zentech had been located to see if they can't get any leads there. They're taking things a lot more seriously now, and they're going to check on the blood work too. It hasn't been long, but given that everything's escalated, they said they'll put a rush on the results. Here's hoping we get somewhere, because this morning was just a shit ton of steps back. June 2nd. I just want to step back from this entire situation for a moment and extend my gratitude to everyone who's commented, sent PMs and offered suggestion and wished myself, my girlfriend and my brother luck through this entire situation. It's been beyond stressful, and living where we do. We don't have a lot of support in the form of family and many close friends, at least besides my brother. You guys have been supportive where I've needed it, and for that I'm thankful. I know I wouldn't have ended up getting half this far without a lot of the ideas and suggestions that have been posted, and because of them, this last week almost has been a bit more bearable. I'll get into the update now. We spent the better part of the morning searching the entirety of my house, top to bottom, with the police. It was a huge help to have more than just my brother and I looking, and in total there was us, the alarm company, to search for any other stray cameras, and about 5-6 officers. We didn't find any more cameras, thankfully, and the alarm company had offered to compensate for this entire situation in the form of an actual home security system and cover it for the first 6 months to see how I adjusted with it. A generous offer, and one I wasn't too keen on accepting with my luck on the first system. They left me their number and assured me that their offer stood if I changed my mind. As far as the builder helping us, the police kept him out of the house after we discovered the false wall, just in case he was involved and would try and alter or change any evidence in the house or steer us in the wrong direction. His crew was all profiled and statements were taken, and everyone ended up going down to the station, my brother and I included. I'd already shared most of what had happened, but it felt good to actually have this become a bigger deal. My brother and I left the station around 1 or so, and an officer had been assigned to escort us back to my house and stick around. We brought up Zentech and the loan office next door, and he agreed to stop by with us on the way. We gave him directions and pulled up front of the loan office and came inside. It had been the same woman from a couple days ago, and she looked like she was pretty anxious, scared, and ready to be anywhere but there. She paged us through the microphone on the wall and asked how she could help. The officer stepped in front of us, asked to speak with the owner, manager, or whoever the hell was more important than her. It was comical, and my brother and I both grinned from behind him. She picked up the desk phone on the other side of the glass, mumbled a few things, and a few minutes later, a man came out from behind the glass from a side door in the lobby and asked what is going on. We brought up the wire flag in front of their business, how next door was supposedly a local alarm company, and wanted to know what they knew about it. After a few minutes of pressuring and the officer threatening to shut them down for the day and drag everyone down to the station, the owner shuddered and left it at, "We don't know." Apparently, a man matching the description of the imposter builder had come by maybe 3 or so weeks ago with a check. He wanted to put a flag in front of their business for advertising, and not to say a word about it to anyone, especially not the police. They had been behind on rent for the building they were leasing, behind on payroll, and didn't hesitate or ask many questions. They saw no harm in having a small flag sit out front. The officer asked for a copy of the check, any proof for the story, and sure as hell, they had photocopied the check and made record of it in case it bounced or came back to bite them in any way, shape, or form. What we didn't expect was that the sum would be so large. The check had been for $25,000. All for the sake of legitimizing Zentech just a little more, just for the sake of saying one business used their system. This all wasn't adding up, none of it's been adding up, and this wasn't helping. We asked if they'd seen the man since he came by again, any additional details of things he might have said, and the owner of the loan office just said that the man had mentioned that we weren't his first stop. That could have meant there were some other failing businesses around town, or it could have meant he had lunch plans at the Olive Garden, who knows. We got back to the house, the officer stayed outside, and we started relaxing for a few. I decided to give my girlfriend a call and fill her in on everything. She was relieved, but at the same time stunned. So much had happened while she'd been gone, and she couldn't wait to be home. I couldn't either, I really couldn't. Given everything that had been going on, my brother and I were fairly certain that things were finally coming to a head, and maybe calming down. I decided to lie down, catch up on some much-needed sleep, and my brother did the same in the living room. The dogs were surprisingly quiet, and we ended passing out for several hours before I woke up to my brother knocking on the bedroom door. He told me something was wrong, the officer outside was gone, and that none of the builders had come back from the station. The entire street was empty. No cars, no trucks, nothing. Everyone had just packed up and left, right under our noses while passed out. I looked for my phone on the nightstand, and then remembered I'd left it on the kitchen table when we first got home, and I'd called my girlfriend. I walked into the living room and couldn't find it. My brother started looking around for his phone too, and neither one of us could find ours. We started to panic for a minute and decided we needed to get the hell out of here before anything else happened. We got the dogs and cat in the living room and started looking for his keys since my car wasn't drivable with the windshield and hood completely smashed up from the other evening, but we couldn't find them either. Both of our keys were gone. Our phones were gone, and no one has a house phone these days. No neighbors next door to borrow a phone from, nothing. Someone had been in the house again, and with all of the people in and out all day long, we couldn't keep up on the logs and had to tape off all the doors. All of our careful planning had completely left us unprotected after everything this morning. We couldn't leave the animals, and so we stayed put. We checked room by room, made sure no one was inside, made sure the crawl space was still covered, and then we made it to the false wall. We pried it open by the flat edge with a kitchen knife and found our phones and car keys lying inside on the ground. Enough was enough. We got into the Jeep, piled all of the animals in the back, and left faster than we could think. This wasn't just people messing with my home anymore. This was someone trying to leave a message. That message was that I wasn't safe and I wasn't beyond protection even if the police were on duty. The cameras were gone and the doors were locked. I was still a sitting duck and they'd won. They can have the house, they can have whatever's in it. They can't have my sanity. We drove straight to the police station, and by the time we pulled up there were a few officers coming outside. They'd been on their way over when neither one of us had picked up our phone, while the officers swapped out watch in front of the house. The officer on duty had left for a family emergency. His wife was in an accident or something, and had phoned for another officer to come in his place, and hadn't thought a 30-minute window was that big of a deal before getting in touch with someone. Stupid F hadn't even knocked on the door to let us know we were alone. We told them everything, how someone had been back in the house, and that our phones and keys were missing, and we found them in the false wall. I got in touch with the realtor, told her she could go F herself if she thought I was paying for the house, and we made plans for tomorrow morning to go and get everything we could carry with a moving truck. It can go into storage, and I'll live in a hotel for a couple days till my girlfriend's back in town, and we figure out somewhere else to live. This isn't worth it. It's not worth finding out who, what, or why these people are tormenting me. It's not worth another ounce of my sanity. We got a hold of my friend who'd let us stay the other night, and he said he'd watch over the dogs and cats for a few days, while everything is sorted out and we get our things. He's a good dude, definitely a much better friend than I'd thought. My brother suggested that we go back to his place since it's only about 45 minutes away, and I could crash there until my girlfriend was back in town, and stay a little while with him while we figure out a new living situation. I relaxed, kicked back, and actually felt a sense of safety walking into his place. It wasn't my house. Anywhere was safer than my house right now. Not a whole lot happened the rest of the evening. We watched a few shitty movies we used to enjoy, Kung Pao and that awful Batman movie with George Clooney, and I ended up crashing on his couch like he'd done the last few nights at my place. I woke up around 11:30-12 a.m. and couldn't sleep. Bad dream or something kept getting to me whenever I shut my eyes. I ended up playing around on my iPhone and noticed my notes application had been open in the background. I opened it and found one I hadn't entered myself. It was a short one, just enough to keep me up all night again. The only thing worth stealing is what you can't physically hold, and what we stole from you is something you'll never know. This is going to be the final update I post. Given everything that's happened and the events of yesterday and this morning, I'm not comfortable continuing things, and they've been following all of it, every single post, every single comment, and everything. They had me pinned down from the beginning, going as far as my Reddit account, my place of work, and even my family. It's all turned upside down and I can't take any more of it. The last update ended with a note saved on my phone. The only thing worth stealing is what you can't physically hold, and what we stole from you is something you'll never know. That was the final straw. That was the last nail in the coffin. They won. I checked the rest of my phone, looking for other windows that had been up. My online banking, my Facebook link to all of my family members, sensitive information for work. They've now dipped into everything. I have so many passwords auto-saved on my phone, so much saved in my notes. My entire life could be accessed from that thing, and they'd done it. My emails were open, and they'd forwarded everything to themselves. It was over, and I'd never be safe again. They had a Safari window open linked directly to these posts, and I had been careful not to keep them up in the background in case my phone was ever taken. But they already knew about them, and posting all of this online for the world to see has been a huge mistake. So many of you have been reading, commenting, and sending me personal messages in good faith with suggestions and helpful ideas, and I'm convinced that they've been right alongside all of you, waiting, watching, and taking each idea and suggestion into consideration and planning their break-ins around them. No wonder they never left traces. No wonder they never broke tap or stepped in the flour. No wonder they were always one step ahead of things. It's because they've known every step before I could take it. I woke up my brother when I'd realized how much info had been accessed on my phone, and he was petrified. Our family's personal contact information was there: mom, dad, cousins, aunts, uncles, and we hadn't even checked on his phone yet to see what could have been looked at on his. We assumed the worst and started making calls to everyone. They were all safe and sound, but equally worried about everything that had happened, and upset that we hadn't come to them sooner or warned them. The entire clan was now on high alert, which made me feel a little bit better. I gave my girlfriend a call, no answer. I called her mom, no answer. I called her sister, and finally someone picked up. It was late, and so at first she was pissed I was calling until she had heard a very brief explanation and woke up my girlfriend. I loaded everything on her, told her to be home by tomorrow and to meet at my brother's house, that I was going to have the movers over tomorrow to have all of our shit put in storage, and we'd figure out the rest when we had our heads on straight. She agreed and told me she'd be on the first flight back tomorrow. She even looked it up on the phone and booked it before I would let her off the phone. She'd be home by 8 a.m. I wasn't sleeping that night. I was hardly blinking. We had to do something, we just didn't know what. My brother had a gun, nothing fancy, just a .22 revolver, but it was enough to put someone down if necessary. He'd had it locked up for over a year, no use in having it aside from protection if anyone ever broke in, and considering my home had constantly been broken into over and over again, we figured it wouldn't hurt to have something with us. We should have escalated to this much sooner, but tonight was as good of a start as any. We decided, like many of you suggested, to go back over there in the middle of the night and try and sneak in, see if we couldn't catch these guys in the act. I'm not entirely sure what we were actually hoping for. At this point, and if we weren't blinded by fear and anger, we would have remembered how organzied and covert these people were. We would have remembered how seamlessly they'd gotten in and out of my house uncaptured, and how many people were actually in on all of this. We were blinded though, so we forgot all of that. It was about 1:30 a.m. My brother gave me some dark clothes, and we grabbed a couple flashlights, the gun, and a gerber he'd been given as a gift from the parents a few years back. It wasn't much, but it was sharp as hell and would go through anything with little to no give. We made the drive back into town in about half an hour, considering the lack of traffic in the middle of the night, and we parked about a mile away from my house. We made sure we had everything, and by the time we got to my street, my watch said 2:15 a.m. We got to the end of my road, peeked down, and saw that all of the street lamps were dimmed, barely illuminating the street below. We cut into the back area where the backyards would be, and crept lot by lot down until we made it to my home. And that was the moment that I remembered everything above, how organized and involved these people were, how they'd see a plan like this coming miles away, and how even if we managed to get into the house without issue, what then? We contemplated for a few moments, arguing in the dark about turning back or not, and a loud noise interrupted us. The alarm system inside was going off. It was blaring so loudly it was echoing down the vacant road. You could probably hear that thing from a mile away. Holy shit, it was loud. We peeked in through the windows. Most had been covered by blinds, but through small cracks between them we could see some source of light in the living room. We walked around to the front door, the alarm blaring as loudly as possible at this point, and we unlocked the door and went inside. The panel on the wall was glowing. I entered the code and the blaring stopped, and then we realized that the light wasn't coming from the alarm panel on the wall. It was coming from the laptop on the kitchen table. We walked towards it, and the graphic on the screen changed. It was a slideshow of me, of my girlfriend, of our pets. When we moved out of our old house and us moving into this new one, there were pictures of us in the living room and kitchen, of us in the bathroom. There were pictures of everything that we'd done. My stomach fell out beneath me. I couldn't hold myself up and slumped into the table. They'd been watching us since before we even moved into this place. They'd had their invasive fingers all over my life. My brother helped me up from the table, and we walked over to the stairs. There was more light coming from the top, and I could only imagine what the hell was up there too. My brother had the gun ready and walked up first, motioning for me to follow. We made it to the top and turned towards the bonus room. Another monitor was sitting on the floor. Didn't have pictures, instead it was open to a web page of my posts on here, and in multiple tabs were every update I'd posted. They'd been watching from the very beginning of things, slowly stalking how I reacted, how I felt, and how I would react. The false wall was wide open, nothing inside, and aside from the monitor on the floor, everything was still in perfect place, just how I'd left it. We walked back downstairs after looking into the other rooms, and we could see light peeking through from underneath my bedroom door. I opened it, feeling like it couldn't get any worse, any more invasive than it already had, and then it did. Sitting on the bed, another laptop with a Word document up. The text was bolded and large enough to read from the doorway. 8 a.m. works great for us. We'll see you there. They'd heard my conversation with my girlfriend, the ones my brother and I had made to family in our panic. They were everywhere. It wasn't just cameras or break-ins. They were in our phones, listening, plotting, and God knows what else. That was it. I walked out of my bedroom, feeling empty, completely unguarded, even in my own skin. We walked out the front door, and I sat down on the sidewalk in front of the driveway. We called the police. They came over and collected all of the laptops, the monitor, and Syed. They'd analyze and wipe everything down for prints. They said we'd have a real chance if anything came off of these things that could lead us to these people in the first place. Any sort of digital footprint, anything at all. I didn't care anymore. I just wanted to be at the airport in the morning to grab my girlfriend and see how far running got us. We ended up going down the station. It was only about 10-15 minutes away and closer to the airport. I managed to keep myself on overdrive on the shitty coffee they had, and chips from the vending machine. 6 a.m. rolled around, and we had 2 officers ready to take us to the airport and escort my girlfriend from the plane, get us somewhere safe. They brought up witness protection, but I had already figured out at this point that it probably wouldn't help much. 6:30 rolled around, then 7, 7:15, 7:30, 7:45, and finally, after what felt like an eternity, 8 hit and planes were landing outside. We watched from the large glass windows in the airport terminal for everyone getting off flights, but my girlfriend never came off a plane. I checked my phone, dialed her over and over again, and kept getting her voicemail. We watched every single person come out into the terminal for baggage claim, and not one of them was my girlfriend. We watched all the luggage on the conveyor belt, and finally I saw her suitcase. It slid by on the conveyor belt, all on its own, and no one walked up to claim it. I knew it was hers. It had the same blue and orange scarf tied around the handle from when we moved down here in the first place. I walked up and grabbed it from the conveyor and realized how light it was. I sat down on a metal bench behind us and unzipped it. None of her clothes, none of her makeup or anything, just an empty case. I unzipped all the pockets, all the sleeves, and in the last one there was an envelope. I tore open the top, and inside was a card, one of those generic, get well soon ones. I flipped it open and saw 2 lines across the bottom. And those lines are the reason I have to stop posting after this final update. They're the reason I have to stop and go as far away as possible, because if I don't, I'll never be safe again. Your eyes have been opened, but your mind's been closed. This is only the beginning if you continue to expose. Run far away now and don't look back. You were just a start when your mother and father could be next. I can't risk it, and I can't keep going on with all of this. I can't put anyone else at risk. I finally figured out what they meant when they said they took something I can't physically hold. They took my life away, they took my time, and they did it in no time at all. I had a neighbor at the end of my block with some severe mental illness issues. but because of his well-connected and wealthy family, they managed to keep him out of jail while denying he needed help. He would sit outside and yell at me, quoting Bible verses and speaking in tongues when I walked by with my baby in her stroller. After maybe a year, he had a breakdown, broke into his neighbor's house, they were friends, locked himself in the master bedroom, and took out all the wife's intimate garments. I think he then called his friends whose house he had broken into. Police were called, and they found that he had been stockpiling gas in his garage. He thought that maybe 5-6 neighbors, me included, were in a satanic cult and planned to burn down our houses. I went with another neighbor, and we got restraining orders. He still wasn't given the help he needed, but did move. He did drive by too and yell out the window of his car, maybe a year or so after the incident. I live alone in a small studio apartment in a very old building. I've been here for almost 2 years now, and despite the small space, I love it here. The downtown location is awesome, and the vintage quirkiness really suits me. A couple of months ago, someone moved in next door to me. That unit has been empty for most of the time that I've lived here, so getting used to the neighbors' noises has been a bit of an adjustment. My bed shares a wall with a new neighbor's place, so when I'm lying in it, I can hear everything. The TV, muffled voices, you name it. For the most part, this hasn't been too annoying. I'm sure he can hear my noises too. But there is one thing that has been really grating on my nerves, and that is the hammering. When he first moved in, I expected it. In a new place, the first thing you want to do is make it feel like home, so you start hanging up all of the picture frames and posters and decorations that you brought with you from your last place. The new neighbor was hammering late at night sometimes, but I figured he just worked odd hours or something. Anyway, it would stop once he got his place together, and how long could that really take? Unfortunately, it seemed to be taking a lot longer than I thought it would. More than 2 months after he moved in, I am still hearing this incessant hammering at all hours of the day and night. You might be wondering why I hadn't approached him about this by now. I am admittedly afraid of confrontation, and since I'm a pretty heavy sleeper, the noise was more of a nuisance than anything. I didn't want to make an enemy of my neighbor over something so trivial, so I let it go. Until yesterday morning, that is. At about 5:30 a.m., I was rudely awoken by the hammering noise again. This was ridiculous. It was one thing when it was happening at 1 or 2 in the morning, but at 5:30. I decided that I had to say something. I threw on a sweater over my pajamas and groggily made my way into the hallway, where I knocked on my new neighbor's door. After a few seconds, a young-ish guy with dark hair opened the door wearing plaid pajama bottoms. I stared at him for a minute, confused. I had obviously just woken him from a deep sleep. Yeah, he asked me. I decided to ask him about the noise anyway. I'm sorry to bother you, I said. But have you been doing some hammering? I live next door, and it's keeping me awake. Hammering, he replied. No, I thought that was you. I thought you were running some kind of furniture business or something. I've been asleep all night. Oh, okay. Well, sorry again for bothering you. Have a good day. Yeah, I'm very smooth. You too. He shut the door, and I walked back into my apartment, still listening to the relentless pounding. At this point, there was no way I was going to get back to sleep. I put my ear up to the opposite wall of my apartment, thinking that maybe I had misjudged the direction of the noise. Nothing. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat on the couch, just listening. Thud, thud, thud. That's when it occurred to me. I jumped up and pulled my couch out from the wall, putting my ear to the floor. Sure enough, the noise was coming from the unit underneath mine. I got up and put my slippers back on, heading back out into the hallway and down the stairs. Eureka! I was finally about to put a stop to this stupid hammering. I arrived at the unit directly below mine. I didn't hear the hammering anymore, but the door was slightly ajar. As I knocked, I called out, "Hello," and the door opened a little further at my touch. "Hello," I said again, taking a step inside. The apartment looked empty, just a bed, a chair, and a ladder inside. I could see what the occupant had been hammering. The ceiling was covered in pictures from wall to wall. Interesting decor choice, I thought as I backed out of the apartment. One of the pictures directly above me caught my eye, and I was filled with confusion, which was quickly replaced by horror as I recognized my own face staring back at me. It had been my Facebook profile picture a few months back. As I looked around at the rest of the pictures, I realized that they were all of me. Every selfie I'd ever taken, every picture I'd ever been tagged in on every social media site was there. There were others too. Pictures of me walking into my building with groceries, serving tables at my job, even elementary school pictures and family vacation snaps, all nailed to the ceiling in this stranger's apartment. I got the F out of there as quickly as I could. When I got upstairs and back into my own place, a picture of me as a child had been shoved underneath the door. I honestly have no idea what to do. Should I call the police? What do I tell them if I do? Should I try to find out who is living in the apartment before I do anything else? I'm really freaked out. I would appreciate any advice you can give me, since knowing what I'm walking on top of every day is scaring the living daylights out of me. Thanks to everyone for posting. Update is below. Thank you to everyone who has responded to my post. I really appreciate your support and advice. I took your suggestions and called the police this afternoon. They came to my apartment building. I met them outside, and they took a report from me there. I explained everything that had happened, and even showed them the photo that had been shoved under my door. We walked upstairs together and knocked on the stranger's door, but no one answered. Unfortunately, they did not have enough evidence to enter the apartment, so at this point, there doesn't seem to be a lot that they can do. The officers did say that I had done the right thing by calling them, and they gave me a case number to use if I need to call back again. I hope it doesn't come to that. I am trying to find someone who can accommodate me and my dog for a few days, but so far I've been unlucky. Honestly, I'm not sure if that will do any good. I suppose it will make me feel safer for the time being, but I will have to return to my apartment eventually. In the meantime, I need to figure out who this person is. At this point, I don't know if I am in any real danger, or if this is just someone screwing with me. I walked around the outside of the building, but I couldn't see anything in the window of the stranger's apartment. I've paced the hallway outside their door several times, listening as closely as I can, but I have yet to hear anything inside. The hammering has stopped. This might sound crazy, but I am wondering if anyone has any ideas for how to break in. I want to take a look at the apartment and see if I can find any clues about who lives there, or why they might be collecting pictures of me. I only got 2 steps inside last time, and I feel sure that there is more information there if I can only get access to it. I am aware that this is probably a bad idea, but I am running out of options, and if I want to stay ahead of this guy, I need to get the upper hand. I will post some photos of my apartment, the hallway, and the stairwell as soon as I get an opportunity. If I find a way into the stranger's apartment, I'll post pictures from that as well. Please keep the suggestions and advice coming. It means more than you know. Part 2. It took me a few days to figure out what I was going to do. Most of you recommended that I find another place to stay, but I didn't have any luck at first. I stayed in my apartment and checked in with friends via phone calls several times a day. Every night, I had to listen to my downstairs neighbor hammering pictures of me into the ceiling. I couldn't sleep at all, and not being able to do anything about it was making me constantly sick to my stomach. I spent some time lurking in the stairwell on the 3rd floor, hoping to get a glimpse of someone coming out of the stranger's apartment, but no one did. I don't know what I was planning to do if someone did come out, but I was tired of feeling helpless. I needed to do something. At least it passed a few of the hours I spent lying awake in the middle of the night. I also walked around the outside of my building several times, trying to get a look into the stranger's window. Unfortunately, I couldn't see much. The window was too high for me to see into, and even at night I never saw a light on inside. I even took a few cell phone pictures, hoping to zoom in and see something on my phone, but again, I had no luck. Since the police weren't very helpful, I decided to contact my landlord. Several of you suggested that they might be able to assist me in finding out who lives in the apartment, but they were unable to provide me with this information, ironically, for privacy reasons. However, they did give me the cell phone number of one of the maintenance guys who actually lives in my building in case I need to get help fast. Luckily, I didn't need to call him, but he did check in with me a few times to make sure I was okay. He also changed the locks on my apartment, which helped me feel a little more secure. Needless to say, as soon as my holiday vacation time started, I packed a bag and headed out of town to my boyfriend's house. I stayed there for 5 days. At first, I was still pretty tense, but after a couple of days, I finally relaxed. I can't tell you how wonderful it was to get some decent sleep. I felt so safe and secure being at his house, but all good things must come to an end. I have to go back to work tomorrow, so this afternoon I came home to my apartment. Driving home, I was scared to death that this sicko would be waiting for me in my apartment when I got back. I circled the building before I came inside, but I still couldn't see anything in that apartment. My heart was pounding as I walked upstairs, and I started to feel sick again. I listened at my door before opening it, trying to make sure that there was no one inside. I didn't hear anything, so I opened the door with my pepper spray out and at the ready, but no one was inside. I let out a huge sigh of relief until I saw something that made my stomach drop. Just inside, on the floor in front of the door, was a stack of photos. As I expected, they were all of me. At the very bottom of the stack was a yellow post-it with a smiley face drawn on it. I called the police immediately. They sent a couple of officers out right away, but again, there doesn't seem to be anything that they can do. We knocked on the stranger's door, but just as before, no one answered. We also spoke with a couple of my neighbors, but they were out of town for the holiday all week and didn't see anything. The cops told me that there is probably no real threat, but to stay on my guard just in case, and to call 911 if I have any problems. I'm sitting in my apartment now and I'm scared out of my mind. I feel like I'm running out of options, and I don't know what my next move should be. Is this person a real danger to me, or should I just try to forget what's happening? As usual, if you have any advice, please post it here. I could really use some new ideas, or even just some support. My mom, 53 female, had to get a restraining order against her landlord, 55-ish male. My mom and dad lived in their apartment for 27 years. They outlasted 4 landlords. But when my dad died, the landlord, let's call him Peter, became a super creep. He began by building an office in the basement beneath my mom's room. The fuse box is right next to it, and one day my mom went down to fix a tripped fuse and caught him masturbating with the door open. He began sitting across the street and just looking at her part of the house. Then taking pictures. Then cameras pointed to her windows. His wife also broke into our home. When I was there, they thought the house was empty. My mom got bed bugs in her apartment, and they refused to treat it for weeks. My mom is a diabetic and was getting small scars all over her body from them. Still does 11 years later. I logged all this crap, started taking my own pictures, and went to police. It took like 7 months to get before a judge. Once there, Peter accused me of being a well-known drug dealer in the town and sold drugs out of my mom's apartment. I was 5 feet tall, hugely pregnant, and a special needs high school teacher. I didn't have time to sell drugs, let alone be good at it. In the end, the judge ordered that Peter and his wife pay my mom $6,000 and be refunded her rent for the 7 months. He gave her the right to live there for a year without the landlord being able to increase her rent payments. Naturally, she didn't stay. I haven't always lived in an apartment, but I have to confess it seemed like a positive change at first. Each new neighbor brought their own story, their own quirks. Most were easy to deal with and respected the rules. Gradually, I managed to establish that typical cordial friendship with most of them, borrowing and lending a cup of sugar when needed. In this pleasant scenario, we welcomed a new neighbor, Mr. Andrews, on the 5th floor. I live on the sixth, directly above him, so I decided to be kind and welcome him. I descended the stairs and knocked on the wooden door, displaying a golden 53. The door opened gently, revealing an elderly man wearing a shirt and a wool vest, with a warm smile on his face. He seemed genuinely happy to see me. "Hello, you must be my new upstairs neighbor, right? I heard your footsteps on the stairs," he said, extending his hand in greeting. "I'm Mr. Andrews, nice to meet you." "Yes, that's me. My name is James," I replied, shaking his hand. "I just wanted to welcome you to the building. If you need anything, just let me know." Mr. Andrews thanked me with a nod and an even wider smile. "Thank you very much, James. Please feel free to visit me anytime." That initial interaction only reinforced my first impression of him. The new neighbor seemed like a lovely person, and as soon as I left, other neighbors came to greet him, and apparently they welcomed him warmly. However, things got a little strange when the sun set. It was, around 10 p.m. I was fluffing my pillow, getting ready to lie down when I started to hear a soft melody in the air. At first, I thought it was just background music from a radio or a party, but the sound was more alive, like it was being played on an instrument. Curious, I went to the window and looked down, trying to locate the source of the melody. The lights in Mr. Andrews' apartment were on, casting onto the sidewalk. Through this, I could see his solitary shadow sitting, fingers dancing over keys of what I logically assumed to be a piano. "This is strange. Does he not know what time it is?" I thought to myself. Well, maybe it's a hobby he didn't have time to practice during the day because of the neighbors' performances. I hope he doesn't stay up too late. I decided to ignore it and try to sleep. Surprisingly, although I thought it would be difficult given the noise, the melody ended up lulling me into a pleasant trance, leading me into a well-rested sleep as the notes echoed through the hallways. The melody became a constant presence in the following nights. As the days passed, I grew accustomed to the comforting sound, and even found myself eagerly anticipating Mr. Andrews' nightly serenade. However, one night, the music started as usual, but as I was about to fall asleep, it turned into a cacophony, a threatening tune that jolted me awake. I got out of bed, listening to the distorted and dissonant sounds echoing while covering my ears. It went on like that for about 15 minutes until it returned to the pleasant rhythm before. That's when it began. The next day, I went to return a tool I had borrowed from my neighbor on the same floor, Philip. I arrived at his door and knocked. I waited, and nothing. I called out a few times, but there was no response. I went downstairs and asked the doorman if he had seen Philip leave that morning, but he said no. I started to worry because Phil was the homebody type. He didn't go out much. 3 days passed before the police came and officially registered his disappearance. Unease began to spread throughout the building. Residents exchanged nervous glances in the hallways, whispered to each other about what might have happened. Some mentioned debts he had, others a possible affair he might have run away with. Some even talked about murder. I couldn't stop thinking about it myself, but it wasn't until the 5th night after his disappearance that I began to connect the dots. I was taking longer than usual to fall asleep, even with the melodic song from my nightly pianist. Lately, he played a more melancholic tune. I suppose he also worried about Philip and expressed it in his music. When I finally closed my eyes, it happened again. The melody started to distort, to turn into something sinister, as if it were a warning, a dark omen of what was to come. My heart raced as I heard the dissonant sounds echoing through the corridors, penetrating my mind like sharp claws. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling of unease only grew until it finally ceased. Not just the noise, but even the music. A deep silence settled in. Not even the sound of car wheels rolling on the asphalt could be heard. The silence was deafening, heavy, as if the building itself was holding its breath. For no apparent reason, a moment of fear dawned upon me. I felt a chill down my spine, as if I were in danger of being watched. I don't remember exactly when, but amidst this jumble of emotions, I ended up falling asleep, a confused, dreamless sleep. The next morning came with a heavy, intense atmosphere in the building. The murmurs of cars were there on the street, but the building itself remained silent, no noise of doors, footsteps, or anything of the sort. I left home, seeing the lights off, descending with a strange feeling of loneliness and discomfort, almost like a liminal space. The hairs on my neck stood up with each flight of stairs. I think the scariest thing about this kind of emptiness is imagining that something or someone might appear, breaking this solitude partially, still taking advantage of it since there would be no one to help you. I arrived at the entrance and saw Jack, the doorman, sitting reading a newspaper. "Hey, it's good to see there's another living soul here," I commented sarcastically. He seemed startled when he saw me. "James, what's going on? Is it a surprise party or something?" "I don't know either. You're the first person I've encountered. It's deserted up there." "That's strange. It's been like that since I arrived this morning. Did you check the other apartments?" "No, I haven't checked," I said, trailing off at the end. I don't want to be alarmist, but I remember reading a news article once about a dangerous gas leak in a building and people died. I know you sleep with your window open, but I think most people here close theirs. He seemed a bit alarmed. "That's worrisome," I replied, trying to remain calm. "Do you want to check the others?" Jack agreed, and we hurried up the stairs, each on a different floor, knocking on every door and calling out to the residents. But there was no response. The hallways were silent and empty. When I was on the 4th floor, however, I heard a creaking door in response to one of Jack's knocks, and a sweet, familiar voice. "Hello, Jack," Mr. Andrews' words echoed through the empty rooms. "Mr. Andrews, good morning, sir. Are you okay?" "Yes, everything's fine, thank you," Mr. Andrews replied in his usual friendly voice. "And how are you?" Jack seemed relieved to hear the voice of the new neighbor. "I'm fine, sir. I'm just worried about the disappearance of the other residents. Have you seen anyone strange or heard anything unusual during the night? Any strange smell or anything like that? Maybe a gas leak?" I haven't familiarized myself with the system here yet. Could you help me check?" "Of course, let's go." I heard the door close, and a sense of foreboding washed over me. I began to quietly ascend the stairs, and as I stepped onto the floor, I heard a melody starting to play. I ran to the door, about to knock, but I stopped, crouched down, and decided to look through the keyhole. The scene on the other side was strange. This time, the window was closed, the room dark, illuminated only by a yellow lamp. Jack was sitting, having tea on the sofa, while Andrews, his back to him, played the piano calmly. The melody was hypnotizing, and I couldn't stop looking. Jack didn't even sip his tea. He was petrified, as if he were reveling in the music. The melody raced, accelerating the tempo more and more. The old man's fingers danced at a surprising speed, hammering the keys with skill until, as before, it erupted into a cacophony of heavy blows on the keys. My body spasmed, and then I saw it, emerging from behind the sofa, a large dark mass slowly materializing. It seemed to twist and undulate as the music reached its distorted climax. Large things resembling black tentacles emerged from its core. My heart raced as I realized the appendages were moving towards Jack, who remained motionless on the sofa, completely unaware of the danger approaching. I knew I needed to do something, but my muscles were tense, my body petrified by the horrifying sight before my eyes. That thing then grabbed him, coiling around his face. I could see him screaming, but it was muffled by the heavy strikes of Andrew's hand on the piano keys. Soon, more began to coil around him, around his arms and legs, starting to squeeze, exerting a force that caused his bones to snap, bent at impossible and incredibly painful angles just to look at. I choked, my mouth trembling uncontrollably. I couldn't speak, run, or even breathe in the face of that horror. Finally, those horrible arms retreated back to wherever they came from, each one taking with it the part of the body it held. Jack's body shattered into a dense and generous torrent of blood on the carpet, his limbs being drawn into the dark mass. When I thought it was enough, a huge tongue emerged from there, passing over the red-stained surface. It trembled, almost in ecstasy, as it cleaned the surface, before retracting again and disappearing completely. Mr. Andrew hadn't moved until then. He continued to play, and suddenly stopped his noise, letting silence reclaim its lost territory. I almost vomited. I needed to get out of there immediately. I descended the staircase to the entrance, but to my bad luck and despair, the door was locked. The doorman's key didn't work, nor did mine. I took desperate measures and started kicking, throwing my weight, and trying to break through that structure, but it was in vain. It seemed like a wall. My noise, however, served to attract unwanted attention. I heard the creaking noise of a wooden door, one that I know had a golden 53 on its frame, and slow, leisurely steps in the corridor, then on the stairs, getting closer and closer. With little choice, I entered the elevator, pressing the 5th button more times than necessary. The noise was now close, right above me, and as the doors were closing, I could vaguely see the silhouette of that pianist emerging. I grew impatient as the numbers went up on the display. Had he seen me? Well, he certainly had seen the elevator, but did he know it was me? Did he know which floor I was coming to? The elevator doors finally opened on the 5th floor, and I rushed out, looking at the staircase to make sure Mr. Andrews hadn't followed. The corridor was empty and silent, no sound of footsteps. With quick steps, I headed to my apartment, locking the door softly behind me. I grabbed my phone to call, but it's out of service. It seems like the line was cut, and to make matters worse, there's no cell signal. I sent messages to some friends online, but they always failed to send. About 5 minutes ago, I heard footsteps in the hallway, echoing, getting closer, until they stopped. I just got up to peek, and I could see through the peephole the figure standing still of Andrews at my door. He has a violin in his hands this time, and seems ready to play something. I hope I can send this post. I hope this works. I just want to ask for help to try to understand what the hell this is. Back when I still lived with my dad, we had these neighbors move in. The mom and daughter, about 7 or 8, were nice. They would wave, and the little girl was especially friendly, always smiling and waving whenever she saw anyone walk by. We had to walk past their house to get the mail, so this happened somewhat frequently. However, the dad was a huge prick. He always had a frown, and was just generally not a nice person to interact with. We had issues because they had a large dog that they left outside all day, and it would bark at every little thing, constantly barking. My dad even called the police to get something done. They eventually got rid of the dog, and were sure the dad told the girl it was our fault. Well, after some time, the mom saw my dad outside one day when there was a moving truck in their driveway. They started talking, and she unloaded all this on my dad. Apparently, the dad had been assaulting their daughter for years, and she had just found out about it recently. He was in jail, and the mom and daughter were moving. She said he insisted on the loud dog for protection, but she felt like it was more about keeping people away so nobody would find out. On another, less creepy but still very weird note, our longtime neighbors on the other side, with whom we shared a front lawn weird cul-de-sac, were this really chill hippie couple. The lady had an older son who was friends with my older brother, but my younger brother and I would just go over there to hang out with the adults. Lol. Legit though, nothing weird or creepy was going on. They had babysat us a couple of times during emergencies, and my parents were close with them. They had pet ferrets we liked to watch, and they always let us play video games and gave us candy and stuff, so, yeah. Later, it turned out the lady was always super happy because she was drunk all the time, though nothing bad ever happened. The guy was a nerd, and when he found out I liked dragons, he showed me his collection of cool dragon figures. He even adopted a couple of our cats after my parents split, and my dad wasn't home a lot because of work, so the cats wandered over to the neighbors to be spoiled. He was a vet tech, so he took care of the oldest kitty until she passed. It was really sad, but he asked my dad if he could take one with him when he moved to Hawaii a few years ago. So, Casper is living it up on the beach now. I'm happy for him. My name is John, a young man who just moved out of his parents' house at the age of 20. In search of a lower cost of living, I decided to move to the small town of Ranival Bay in southwest Michigan. It's one of those American towns you see in movies, spaced out houses all built similarly. Most of the residents are elderly, making it very quiet for most of the year. No noisy parties, speeding cars, or anything like that, which I particularly love. However, shortly after moving, I noticed something strange. My neighbor, Mr. Anderson, has the peculiar habit of lighting a candle every night, religiously at 11:50 p.m., and placing it in his window. He stands there for about 15 minutes, gazing at it, and then goes to sleep. On nights of strong wind or rain, he tends to shield it with something similar to a lantern. I really wanted to know what that was all about. Was it a superstition? A local tradition ancient enough for only the oldest of elders to remember? I didn't even know how to ask him about it. I briefly mentioned it to an elderly woman, Mrs. Percy, a very kind neighbor who would often show up at my door with sweets and cakes. When I asked, however, she simply changed the subject, and this happened more than once. One day, I gathered the courage to approach Mr. Anderson directly. I walked up to his door, nervous, and knocked. He opened it with a friendly smile, and I, hesitatingly, started asking about the candle. He listened to my question, and for a moment his eyes seemed distant, as if recalling something. Then he simply said, "It's just a family tradition. Nothing for you to worry about, young man." Unsatisfied with the vague answer, I tried to insist for more details, but he politely closed the door, saying he preferred to keep family traditions a secret. I was frustrated, but my curiosity only grew. I decided to search for information at a small cultural center in town, hoping to find some record that explained the tradition or someone who could shed light on it. However, my effort was in vain. The files were scarce, and the few available details about Ranival Bay didn't mention anything about lighting candles. I tried talking to the officials who handled the center, but they acted similarly to Mrs. Percy. Gradually, all this denial of information became an obsession for me. I waited all night by the window, just waiting for the moment when he would light the candle. On a holiday eve, I even stayed up all night to see if the candle would go out or when he would remove it. He removed it at exactly 5:55 a.m. I was running out of ideas. For a while, I even kept an eye on the neighbors' houses, watching if they would do the same. For some reason, only Mr. Anderson had this habit. With few options left, I went for my emergency plan. On that day, exactly at 11:50, I placed a candle in my window and lit it. It had been an intense work day, and I really needed to sleep, but I couldn't now. I sat in an uncomfortable chair in my room, facing the candle to avoid falling asleep. It didn't work so well because slowly Orpheus called me with his sweet song, leading me into Hypnos's arms. I was relaxed, unconscious, when I heard a noise that made me jump from the chair. It was knocks, something hitting against the wood of my door. I looked through the window and saw Mr. Anderson at my doorstep. He knocked one more time. "I need to come in," he shouted. "Let me in." I rushed down the stairs, still confused with everything. I approached the door as the pleas intensified. But when I reached the door, about to grab the handle, something triggered my instinct. I felt there was something wrong, and I decided to check before opening. I approached the peephole, staring at the one who disturbed my sleep. He was there, the familiar neighbor, but different. His mouth was open at an unconventional angle. The voice didn't come from his lips. It seemed to emanate from the black hole that was his mouth. His eyes darted frantically from side to side, unfocused on anything. From his chin, a thick foam dripped, forming puddles on the floor. His arms, now bleeding and twisted, seemed crushed by the wood, judging by the way they contorted. The blows intensified, almost as if the door was about to come off its hinges. I ran to one of the cabinets and pushed it to block the passage. It went on like this all night until 5:50 a.m. I wondered why no neighbor woke up with all this racket. I saw him through the window, returning home, entering, and exactly at 5:55 a.m., appearing at his window to remove the candle. The rest of the day was a nightmare. I was sleep deprived and had to drink about 5 cups of coffee to make it through the workday. This sleepless night left me like a human wreck. I had to go to work in that state, and the 5th cup of coffee in my hand felt like an illusory comfort as I tried to stay awake. I couldn't help but think about the events of the previous night. The image of Mr. Anderson desperately banging on my door haunted my thoughts with every blink. At the end of the workday, I decided I needed to understand what was going on. I took the way back home, nervous, tense. The town was shrouded in a peculiar silence, and the lights of the houses hummed faintly. The street was deserted, with no signs of life besides me, and the small details that made up the landscape, like the occasional passing car or barking dog. As I approached home, I spotted Mr. Anderson in the distance. A wave of terror hit me, and I thought about turning back, avoiding the inevitable encounter. However, something inside me insisted that I needed to face that situation. He was walking slowly towards me, completely normal. His friendly and welcoming smile was back, in contrast to the hole that was his mouth the night before. He waved when our eyes met. The scene was so distinct from the disturbing image of the previous night that I almost questioned my own sanity. "Good afternoon, John," he greeted, as if nothing had happened. "Good afternoon, Mr. Anderson," I replied, trying to keep calm, even though my heart was still racing. I hoped he would mention something about the previous night, but he continued the conversation as if nothing were different. We talked about the weather, the neighborhood, trivial things that made no sense in the face of the terrible experience we shared. I was eager to get inside, passed by him and went in, but before closing the door, I couldn't help but ask, "Mr. Anderson, are you okay?" He frowned, as if trying to remember, but then shrugged. "Oh, the usual, young man. A backache here and there, but nothing major." I didn't know what to think. His answer was so casual, as if I were imagining things. He greeted me, and I saw that there wasn't even a scar, let alone wounds on his hands and arms. Could it have been my imagination? Unfortunately not. I'm well aware of that now because night after night, he comes to scream at my window, saying he needs to come in, regardless of whether I have a candle lit or not. Believe me, I've tried both solutions with no result. I'm really starting to get used to this. It wouldn't be such a big problem until yesterday. I was setting up the desk to block the door as always. I had already put the furniture on standby when Mr. Anderson started his nightly noise. I was about to go up to my room, put on my headphones, and sleep when I passed by the staircase facing the back door. And then, while my neighbor screamed desperately that he needed to come in, I heard a single knock on the door in front of me. Since I lit a candle in my window, my neighbor asks every night for me to let him in, and now there's something knocking on my back door. There's a woman living in the apartment above me. She almost never leaves her apartment, and I can hear her humming pretty much all day and all night. She also plays the violin very poorly. And the few times I have seen her in the hallway, she looked at me with a weird expression on her face. I often wake up in the middle of the night because she is humming so loudly, it's almost ear-piercing. Other times I wake up because of loud noises as if she dropped something. Because I can hear her pretty much 24/7. I don't think she sleeps very much, or maybe not at all. It has been like this for over 3 years now, but only during 2020 when I had to study from home, I really felt the extent of her humming noises. In the summer months I often sleep with the window open, and when she starts humming it sounds like she is standing right on my balcony. Imagine waking up to that at 2:30 a.m. Maybe she has some mental disorder. I don't know, it's just that constant humming that's really driving me crazy. I worked as a resident manager for an apartment complex. The place was shady AF, but I wanted to be able to work from home and care for my 2 boys, while my husband was a full-time student, and most other places required 1-year experience in the field. The business was family-owned, and the dad was in prison for tax evasion. One of the sons fancied himself a psychologist, and would make very detailed profiles of his employees. The other son was the on-site maintenance for the property. His apartment building was across from mine and a floor up, which he told me was so that he could spy on me. He would come to my place and talk to my husband while I was there and offer to share and watch corn with him. I have the best corn. He would call me little squirrel and shake me when I would disagree with him. I was young and terrified of losing my job and place to live at the same time, and didn't know what else to do but apply for new jobs as I waited for my year to be up. Finally, I got a new job, a few days after we moved out. I went for a move-out inspection with my 2 boys 2 years old and 7 months. When we were about 15 miles away, my 2-year-old started sobbing and crying, "I don't want to go to the old house, I want our new house." It broke my heart that he too was experiencing trauma from that awful place. When I was younger, we had an elderly next-door neighbor who lived alone, and her mental and physical health were slowly deteriorating. She was eventually moved to a care home where she'd spend her final years. Late one night, our family woke to hear a strange rapping at the front door. When we looked out the window to see what it was our old neighbor who had fled from the care home. She was barefooted and wearing only a nightgown, and had walked around 10 miles in the middle of the night to get back to her old home. She came to our house as she was convinced that we were responsible for her losing her home, and that we somehow now had the keys to it and were keeping them from her. She was clearly upset and confused, and in hindsight, this is obviously an awfully upsetting situation for this poor lady to have found herself in. But as a kid, the image of this frail, skeletal woman knocking on our door in the middle of the night and screaming at us to surrender the keys to her home is one of the creepiest memories I have. Lived near a family that was weird and mostly kept to themselves once. One night, a bar in the neighborhood got rowdy and started setting off fireworks in the street. One went wild and almost hit a house. A bunch of neighbors came outside yelling at the bar patrons to stop, and we called the cops. The guy in that house was outside in just his boxers, and we talked to him briefly while waiting for the cops. The cops got heckled and ran off without doing anything. The guy didn't do or say anything specifically weird, but I got a bad feeling about him. A year or so later, it came out that he was assaulting the 2 young girls living there. They were his stepdaughters. Their mom would actually hold them down for him and took pictures and videos of their pain. They were both convicted and are in jail now. The girls were placed with family in another town. Scum lived just up the street, and I never knew. I hope they both die in prison. When I first moved out for uni, I moved into a house that had been split into 3 flats. We kinda did student living backwards as we went private residential living first, then into halls, but anyway, I digress. The first creepy neighbor was a guy in a wheelchair who lived in the house next door. Looking back, I think he was relatively harmless and had kinda taken on a neighborhood watch kinda role. Within a few days of moving in, though, he was trying to get me and my housemate over, and we were having none of it. Over that year, he kept trying to invite us over, and we just felt a bit creeped out by it. We weren't kids, we were 19 or 20, so it wasn't that hopefully. But every time we walked past, we would be very obvious about putting headphones on, or be on the phone, or in a rush or something, so he couldn't catch us for a chat. Whilst living in this flat, we also had an argument with a woman who lived at the back, and had decided she would turn up to the door naked, whilst her girlfriend was screaming something from the back room. Very weird. Can't remember what we were arguing about. The neighbor downstairs was possibly the worst. She would bang on our door and complain about us when we weren't doing anything. We would then get notes under the door asking for money for cigs. We did not get on. The worst thing they did was deadbolt the front door to the house, which as a shared house is a major dick move cost. You can only open from the inside. And then the door to our flat broke, so I was stuck outside and my housemate was stuck inside. And it was after a night out, so it was freezing and late. was the worst house in terms of neighbors. That street could have had its own sitcom. My neighbors who never liked me and my family much are weird or crazy. Let me explain one instance. I was playing video games one evening at home and my family was home too. The neighbors, just dad and daughter, came over and knocked on the door, which is already strange considering that they refused to even meet us when we moved in. Then they asked my parents where I am and if I am with any friends. My parents tell them that I am inside. The dad proceeds to tell my parents that there are like ninja acrobats setting up and taking down a zip line from their house to some trees in the dead of night every night. He also mentions that he is taking watch from their sunroom and not calling the cops, but for some reason to protect his family. My parents are obviously confused, and this guy pushes his way into the house to look for me because he is convinced that I was zip-lining on his house right now. But he then sees me on the couch playing video games, so he apologized and left quickly, and we haven't really spoke since.
Thanks for listening. If you like our work, do subscribe because your support helps us keep this channel alive.